It's 9, we can get started. We were Donna, you ready?
Yes, sir.
Okay, let's go ahead and start, please.
Well, Mayor and Council, we're here today to talk about the opportunities and challenges that are coming to us because of the widening of I-35. And what we want to make sure is that we take advantage of these opportunities and we properly manage those challenges so that we can have a real impact on the character and identity of Lewisville. So with that said, we've got an agenda up on the screen, and you'll notice some time frames that are listed on that screen. So if we stay true to those time frames, we'll be out of here around 11:30.
Okay.
Staff's willing to spend as much time as you guys want to spend, so certainly we can go over those time frames, but if we stay true to it, we should be done around 11:30. We will bring sandwiches in about 11, so we'll have a little snack. So I'm going to spend just a few minutes this morning talking about the 2025 plan, the I-35 plan. Just refresh your memory on a few key points related to those two plans. And then I'm going to turn it over to Eric, and Eric's going to talk to you about the actual TxDOT property acquisitions. He spent quite a bit of time, and Rudy knows the challenge here, of trying to go back to TxDOT and really have them tell us what the status of those acquisitions are, and he's got an updated list. We met with TxDOT yesterday afternoon, and Verona told us he's meeting with TxDOT, getting additional information from the powers that be at TxDOT, and we should have even better information in about 3 weeks. So he is, they are working with us on that. And then we will turn our attention to something staff's been working on about 4 months, and that's a right-of-way impact ordinance. And this would be an ordinance that's going to help us deal with the minor impacts, and we'll define those for you, and major impacts. And again, the goal being to try to manage the takes in such a way that we get as much bang for the buck in relation to the I-35 redevelopment plan. Mr. Petty then is going to talk to you about opportunities we have with vacant property that exists now along the interstate. And then finally, we'll turn it over to Nika, and she's going to talk to you about something we've mentioned earlier, and that's the establishment of a corridor overlay district, and then focal development strategies and things that can be done to move along implementation. So with that said, we'll turn our attention to the I-35 plan. Steve's going to push buttons for me. So you adopted your plan back in November of 14, and it is a plan. It is a vision plan. Now, I will tell you that staff's already used this plan. As we've talked to business owners, as we've talked to developers along the corridor, we've already been out, we've already been sharing this plan with others. It is already having an impact. But I think you all know that it certainly has limitations. It has not changed the land use types. It has not established new standards. Your existing ordinances still control. So if you want something beyond what you have now, that's why we're talking about the overlay districts. Very, very similar to what you have in Old Town, with the overlay district in Old Town. There is a connection between the Vision 2025 and your I-35 plan. Steve's behind me on the one more. There you go. The big move number 7 in your 2025 plan is focus on identity focal points. And the identity focal points are areas or gateways along the I-35 highway that would be areas that should receive the first attention as far as redevelopment. If you look at your I-35 plan, your I-35 plan actually was divided out into 7 sub-areas. And in that plan, it also talked about focusing redevelopment on 3 areas that they believed would be catalytic as far as development along the interstate. So your plans are in sync there. They're both looking at focusing on those 3 highly visible intersections. We're looking at private development coordinated with public investment. We truly believe, we've worked with various consultants, Mr. Petty will tell you this, without public investment, you're not going to probably see private development. So to obtain new retail, employment, and residential uses is going to take city focus. The development pattern that's recommended.
Before you move on there, will we go over the, I guess, when you start talking about that, the difference between the commercial and the residential? If you go back to your last deal, you talked, that last thing you said was development, what did I say? Resident, employment and residential uses. So some of that is residential and some of it is looking at commercial. Are we going to identify the different areas and stuff for that?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yes. You have currently along the interstate a suburban strip development. So you have various uses. Certainly, mainly in the southern area, you have these suburban strips. The focus of the I-35 plan is more on a nodal type development. So, Steve, go back to the one before. There you go. So, in nodal development, you're really looking at creation of a place that focuses on community and improved uses, more of a sense of place is probably the best way to say it. And then you have connections of open space buffers. That's a very long range change in what you see along I-35. But again, the focus would be starting that at those 3 identity focal points along the way. Ika, do you want to add anything to that?
Just that if you remember, one of the points of I-35 was to get people off the highway. When they're coming through Lewisville, not look at I-35 as just, pass through in Lewisville, but have places where they could get off the highway, be in Lewisville, stay in Lewisville, shop in Lewisville, and live in Lewisville. So this pattern provides for that, a means for people to basically get up, have a reason to get up. Versus when you have strip development, it's pretty much the same as any place else, and you just drive through it.
So you have that sense of place.
Creating that, it's basically placemaking, and creating that a different, you're driving to a different area.
I see. So again, we're back to the 3 identity focal points, or called sub-areas in your I-35 plan. The Lake Development, Gateway to Old Town at 121 and I-35, and then down around the mall and the Huron TOD. The Northern Identity Focal Point basically starts up at Garden Ridge down to north of the railroad crossing. The current state, the west side contains your largest contiguous set of vacant parcels in the corridor. Trent's going to talk to you about those parcels this morning and what opportunities we might be able to take advantage of now related to that vacant property. The east side is really reflective of what we've been talking about for a couple of years now in relation to your lake development project. The impacts of I-35 of the takes is primarily all along the west side. Your vision then is your east side is captured in lake development, and the west side focus is mixed use and office development. But to make this happen, we're going to require partnerships with property owners and developers, and aggressive incentive strategy. It's your sub-area 2. You see it at Garden Ridge. You can see the impacts as you move down the interstate.
Go back one, please. Steve, could you go back one?
This is a map that was actually done back in 2011, and so it's fairly reflective of what's happening. But you can see the pink property are building impacts.
What's with the cluster of vacant parcel impacts up on the lake? Is that, or is that just because the parcels are so close together that it's looking like pink?
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, exactly. I don't see that yet.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I know.
Is that the file for final take for phase 1 or phase 2?
These were done very early, Mayor, and so there probably been changes since then. At the time this was done, there was not a phase 1 and phase 2.
Right, when this was done, it was basically, we're looking at the ultimate take. So you're pretty much looking at, this line may move a little, which is the blue line. But this, actually, in this area, much of the take has already been taken place.
Even for
So the
phase
blue-
2?
We'll show them some of that in a minute.
Yeah,
Yeah, we're going to get into those
Oh, okay.
details
Okay.
in just a minute. The second focal identity point at Business 121 and 35, as you're well aware, the current state, it's dense and varied land use, both commercial and light industrial use. The impacts here for the takes are largely on the west side along Lakeland Plaza, and then on both sides of Business 121. The vision here is, this is your point of entrance, your gateway into Old Town. So you're looking for new retail and entertainment venues along the east side, and then additional mixed-use commercial along the west side. Next. So this shows you the takes along this part of the interstate. You see more just parking impacts, which means that where the property is taken is just affecting the parking that is along the interstate. The blue
Are those two
area.
yellow ones up there?
That's
Car yards?
parking. That's parking impacts. Down here around, I think that number's 34. Is that 34, Eric? The blue, that's Lakeland Plaza. It's Lakeland Plaza. Then you see the impacts along Business 121. And Eric's going to go into great detail on these parcel impacts in just a minute.
Donna, could you clarify for me the difference technically between land impacts and vacant parcel impacts?
Nick, if you want to answer that. This was done with the study that was originally done a number of years ago.
Right, vacant land is basically a piece of property that has nothing on it, it's vacant. So they're basically taking a piece of a vacant land. Land impact is a piece of property like Lakeland Plaza that is a development, it has building on it. But they're taking a piece of the land, but it doesn't impact the building itself.
Nor does it
It
impact the
doesn't- it
parking.
Nor does it impact the parking.
Okay.
So it might impact the
Just some of
10-foot median with greenery in it.
Exactly.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
So that's basically parking.
And finally, you have your southern identity focal point. This is the toll road at IH-35. You have your suburban style pad sites. This is Vista Ridge Mall. Most of the impacts here are along the east side of the interstate. And the vision here is to create a new character by focusing on the investment in existing buildings, obviously though looking for new development and enhanced area landscaping. Redevelopment opportunities, Lake Point Shopping Center and Vista Ridge Mall. Certainly Hebron 121 Station is another opportunity. We are in the process of working with DCTA and the Huffines Group on an additional plan that'll look at the use of the city property, as well as some creative uses of the DCTA property. So Steve, you go.
Stop grinning. It's not a grinning there.
So again, this shows the various
Hold on.
impacts that Eric will get into far more detail on here in just a moment. As you can see, obviously, the building impacts, you have abuelos, you have the restaurants that are being taken. Another big move that's found in your I-35 or in your 2025 plan relates to employment centers, and that's just to remind you that as we work on the I-35 redevelopment, certainly a major goal is to create new employment centers along I-35, and certainly to enhance those existing centers also. Major goal. The I-35 plan did look at market areas that we should be targeting as we look at redevelopment. So in the northern part, you're looking at recreation, office, hotel, around the hospital, certainly medical services, office retail as you move south, and finally mixed use and retail in your southern boundaries. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eric, and he's going to get into the details of the TxDOT acquisitions.
So I'm going to pass out hard copies of what's in your,
Please don't pass it.
hard copies of the parcel takes of 35. They're arranged from south to north, going up to the quarter from Sam Rayburn 121 all the way up to the lake. You have this in your backup on the screens. This may be a little bit more readable for you.
Thank you.
Pretty interesting document. You'll note that, again, you're going to have a description of the businesses on there. You'll have their address. You'll have an indication of whether it's phase 1 or phase 2. You'll have an indication of whether it's a partial or full impact. I'm also going to pass out, and this was not in your backup because this is a working document that we just received yesterday. This is actually a status of take work spreadsheet. This will show you the parcel number. It'll show you the address. It'll show you what they call a CSJ number. I'll talk about that in a second. I'll show you the status of the take. Now, this is going to be a working document that I'll pass along to you every so often, maybe every 3 to maybe 30 days, 3 weeks to 30 days, as they progress with their acquisitions. Fact, acquisitions are nowhere near being final. If we think back to the original concept of I-35, it was one project many years ago now, and they went out there in kind of a shotgun scatterbrain manner to acquire parcels. They went out there early on some of the parcels for commercial. They did not touch much of the single family. And as time went on, as the project went into 2 phases, they still had parcels that were phase 2 that they were doing early acquisition on. Some were voluntary, some weren't. You had 2 or 3 different engineering groups working. You had HAF, you had HDR, and someone else, Dave, I don't know who the other one was, Friesen Nichols or somebody was doing early acquisitions. So it left us with kind of a tough situation to describe of why some parcels are being taken now and some aren't. Y'all had shared some concerns with TxDOT along with other cities about let's get the single family taken care of, and they did that. They went back to the single family. We'll take a look at that in a minute. They made one good offer. They said we'll do it early, although most single family is in phase 2, which could be 6, 8, 10 years from now. They went out there and made offers to those people to keep them from hanging in the future and giving them an idea. A lot have taken that offer. To be blunt, if that person said, well, I don't know, I'm going to need to get my attorney, I don't like that, TxDOT rescinded and said, we'll deal with you and we'll see you in 6, 8, 10 years. So that's happened. So we have kind of a calico mixture of positions up and down the quarter. So this document, this spreadsheet will grow. We'll get more information. You'll see some status on there of everything from closed means they're finished. We'll show you a few of those properties to no offer made. You'll see the word ED, that means eminent domain, and there's many phases of that. They may be just starting. You'll see some condemnation hearings on there, condemnation payment packages. That's toward the end. That's another step, as I understand, toward the eminent domain process. And then there's some parcels that aren't shown on this. That means that A, they've not started on it, they've made no approach on it, and or B, TxDOT just doesn't have them on the list because they're trying to get a handle on this from Whitlock to Denton to do a comprehensive list of status of take without giving away, of course, their approach to obtaining these in fair market values and whatever they're doing.
So on the ones that are like ED and condemnation package, isn't there I was thinking y'all told us this when, basically when they were looking at taking our piece of park property up there north of Clark. Even if they haven't resolved the issue, then go ahead and take that land and start working on it. Didn't y'all tell us that? They can't stop the construction phase, or they can't prevent the state from going ahead and working on that, right? Wasn't that something?
Well, once you go in and have the commissioners hearing, and the commissioners award the that money goes into the registry of the court and then possession, then the state can take possession.
But not until it goes before the commission.
Right.
So on these that are ED and condemnation package, are those, they have not gone to Commissioner's Court yet, I guess?
There's, according to TxDOT, there's 7 to 9 to 10 steps. So there's different hearings. So yes, possibly they have condemnation package payment. From what I understand from Varuna yesterday, that means that it's either set or they're in it. It's been delayed or it's closing. So it's in some sort of phase of that process. Hasn't closed yet.
But probably on the ones where it's saying condemnation package, you're saying that those, they can probably go ahead and start, the state can go ahead and start working on that problem, take it and start working on it, but the ones that are ED, maybe not.
Let me find out, Mayor. It's a good question. Again, their legal people weren't there yesterday, and again, some of this, you know, he's a little hesitant to answer, but I'll get you an answer on that. And I think you'll see this spreadsheet grow, and it will be, hopefully we can get, there's a column or two on there that they're working on that gives a percentage of take, and that would be the percent of square footage of that parcel or platted lot. They could have a couple of columns, and they're a little nervous to put those on there. The status of the displacement due to acquisition or by municipal ordinance or code. And those kind of work hand in hand, and they do play into their offer when they go in. They do consider that when they make that property owner that offer. And we'll see that in a minute.
Thank you.
Again, on the CSJ number, you're going to see some parcels here that are duplicated. You have two parcel 3s, you have 2 parcel 60s, and I don't know, there's several in here that are duped. There's a difference, though. If you see the CSJ, that's a TxDOT region or budget or project sector of I-35. So don't get confused if you see 2 3s or there's one with 2 60s, I think. There's an IHOP, then there's one, or Cracker Barrel, and there's one that's actually one of the lakes down there at Lake Point. Identical parcel numbers, but there's 2 different CSJs, so I left that on there. Dave, CSJ, construction segment, something. It doesn't mean anything to us. I can't explain it, but it's a region or a budget or a design parcel of I-35. So that'll tell you that it's 2 different ones.
Yep.
So let's take a look right quick. We'll go from south to north. This is illustrating basically up to Saltgrass. We're going to take parcel 21 as an example. That is Abuelos. Abuelos is a full take. They've been paid in full, or they will be paid in full. The acquisition has not taken, it's not closed. They're in, I think this is one that actually has one of the condemnation package, payment package listings on it, if I'm not mistaken. What will happen here is TxDOT only acquires or gains the property that they're actually going to use. They're going to take that property between.
Oops.
Oh, shoot. Bang.
Somebody put
Get back.
somebody put the
So what-
new driver.
Go back to your PowerPoint, Steve, the red, there you go.
So while you're doing it, you brought up a
Well,
well.
it's doing that.
I think I mentioned this the other day. I've heard that they're moving out on 121 by the
Nebraska Furniture.
Nebraska
You're-
Furniture.
you're
But
correct.
is it in Lewisville still, or no? It's not in Lewisville. Okay.
Not going to be in Lewisville, but
Good
Nika
phone.
has not given
Go back
up
to
on
your
it.
red-
She
your
actually
red
had a
icon.
conversation with,
Right there.
Jackson Shaw is developing the one in front of Nebraska Furniture Mart. Because we are 2 different sectors of opportunity.
So that's going to be the
121.
colony, basically? They're going to be in the colony?
Colony.
Okay.
But this is a different market segment for them, and eventually, so Jackson Shaw has a piece of property in Lewisville as well. So we're talking to them about bringing some of those restaurants that they have over there back.
Turn your laser
of
on.
course, we've not given up on it, Mayor.
But
Okay,
we have-
just curious.
yeah.
I can ask something like. I don't see that real now.
This pot. So again, they're going to take, we're going to show them what they're going to, they're going to take the front half from the green line up here. That's the portion that they're actually going to use. They'll pay them for the entire property, okay? Then we'll revert back what they're not going to use. So everything where Steve's showing you, that property owner is going to get that back, although he's paid in full. at whatever level, at whatever negotiation they come back. So that's going to be a constant up and down the corner. So it's a full take, and in most cases, it'll never be, we paid you in full and we took 100% of your land. That's going to be a rare situation. They're going to give back that remainder, both commercial and single family. We're going to take a look at that in a minute.
Which is a concern.
So Abuelos is a good example. Next door, Frankie's, same thing, back to 22. You'll see a lot of these. You're going to see Mimi's, although they closed down. It's going to be, that's a full impact, and we're going to talk about major and minors in a minute because we're going to parallel that. But yellows from, and you can see on your menu bar there, you've got full and you have partial is the pink. Where it's hashed, it means
Phase 2.
means phase 2, a phase 2 acquisition.
But now, are those properties that there, just this applies, are they individually owned by those restaurants, or are they part of that tenant of that, are they a tenant of that strip?
No, everything here, when you see a line like he's showing you, that's a property line, and that's either owned by Mimi's or some investment group that's there. Now, you can pull up DCAT and see now in some cases, maybe the shopping center owner does own that pad site, but you have the owners listed there, and you can look those up. We'll take a look at that in just a moment. Okay, so we're going to go up, and most of the take in this area is on the east side. Then you're going to see it kind of swap, and then it goes back to the east side or to the west side to finish. So let's go up the corridor. Again, we're approaching Hebron Parkway. You can see Olive Garden. It's into the building. It's a full take. And the idea, what we're going to look at in a minute, is most of those type of parcels, as Olive Garden, can't survive because it cuts a third of their building in half, takes probably 40% of their parking, so they're going to be paid in full. Okay, let's keep coming north. Again, you can see on the west side up here on Hebron Parkway are just clips. That's the old Blockbuster, the medicine shop, vitamin shop up here next to Taco Cabana. Just takes a clip. Other side where Borders Books used to be, just takes a corner clip. So the take is mainly on the east side. You see the old Bennigan's Tilted Kilt. It doesn't get into the building. And again, this is hashed. It's a phase 2. You say, well, gee whiz, Ferris Wines, some not, some the other. Well, I was telling you that because they went out there initially and made some early offers on phase 2, phase 1 when it was all one project. So you're going to see that kind of a Mutt and Jeff up and down the quarter.
So the pink ones, though, we're not, or
It's
the
a
pink
partial.
hash, the pink barred ones, we're not going to see anything happen to that for a decade.
Maybe, maybe not.
If you see it on the list that they're involved, then you may. There again, you may not. Now, of course, we're using code enforcement on this one as a abandoned building. Doesn't mean somebody won't go in and buy it. That's happening actually now, where people are buying it knowing that, and typically what we see in engineering is they come and ask us, hey guys, where's the right-of-way line? They know what's left over, and they may try to design and look at that. We'll show you some of those in a minute.
But we're not going to see any text dot activity on that property.
You shouldn't, but it doesn't mean that they won't. If that's listed on your chart, they may go ahead and close it out. Again, that's kind of one of those goofy things that doesn't add up. They've done.
Work on it would not encourage a phase 2.
Yeah. Well, that just because yeah.
There's been some phase 2 parcels that they've taken the building and cleared it off, or initially, as a part of the voluntary take early on. We'll see a couple of those in a minute.
When they do that, like for example, let's say they took that whole, that piece right there that you're talking about, are they allowed to use that for storage equipment, sand, rock, gravel, all that stuff?
In the right-of-way, if it's tied to their construction project, we really don't have any jurisdiction to tell them yes or no. On the private side, we have some say with regard to batch plants and things like that necessarily, again, they won't own this. They'll own the top piece where Steve's pointing out. We really don't have a lot of
That's right,
jurisdiction.
they're gonna pay for the thing, but they don't
The
take it
portion that
off.
reverts
I got it.
back is private property, and we'll have a say on what's going on with it. Okay, let's keep going north. So we're coming up. This is going to be. We'll talk about these parcels in a minute. You can see where the take lines start to kind of even out. Let's keep coming, Steve.
Let's
come all the way up toward Fox, and we'll come back to Business 120 using an example. Okay, this is interesting part. Let's pop a little bit. So you're going to see some orange here. It means that, your maps show this, it means the take's already happened. They've closed on these. These are single-family residential along Harbor Drive that were zoned, spot zoned or mass zoned in the city, Nika, back in the 60s or 70s. Probably some of the first things when they had a zoning ordinance that they looked at, they blanket zoned a lot of properties, GB, LI, and single family up and down the quarter. These are houses that have been in place since probably the 50s. You'll see the take line there, the green line. And you'll see most of those are phase 2. Again, we know that phase 2, they went out there on single family and made those offers to homeowners. Let's look at parcel 75R. That's closed out. They've taken it, they've closed, they've paid, and I believe the house is gone. What you're going to see here is that the front half, let's go to DCAD right quick, Steve. You see the line, the orange line? I'm going to bring you up on an aerial here. We're going to show you that, yeah, you have to catch up there. That's, yeah, let's go north a bit. What we're going to show you, and Councilman Durham can probably better elaborate on this than myself, but we're going to show you where that actually shows up, and where it's, yeah, that's next. That one's not split, Steve. Let's go down one lot. Okay, this one right here. You'll show that's TxDOT. Okay, so TxDOT acquired that. Hold right there a minute and show us the line there in the middle. Can you see that line? There's the take line, right there. There you go, see, just move it back and forth. There's the take line, that's the right-of-way line right there. Now let's see on the east side, what's happening on single family, and y'all have done some of these, City of Lewisville. The owner does a donation deed back to the city, and the last set y'all approved was in July. You have approximately 12, 14, 15 properties right now that we own. I've got a listing if you'd like them, I can pass them out. That are leftovers. You have about 6 in the queue coming to you, Nika, probably in the next month or so. Opportunity, maybe some challenges, but this is kind of a Mutt and Jeff that's going up and down the quarter. You can see some of the lines on these. In some cases, the house may not be torn down. Well, and kind of remember this, because when we get into the interim ordinance, we're going to talk about single family. Kind of go up north, pull up north, and let's catch this one up here, Steve. There you go. So the line here, we believe may come through somewhere right in here, but the house may stay. So our interim ordinance, we'll talk about in a minute. We're probably not going to go there. We're not going to be approaching a family saying, hey, get out, or you're not going to make it where the take doesn't impact the house where it can't stand alone. So we're going to pretty much excuse those for now. But I wanted y'all to see what's going on. I've got a listing of those. I've got some of those city parcels color-coded if you'd like to see them. I can.
When they, using that one example to show, when they take a big piece of the property but they don't impact the house, is the state paying them for the whole piece of property?
Yes.
Okay.
They pay them for the home.
They are, and our code enforcement people right now with parks, we're going through now, we'll show you some segments up north, but through here, they take the house down. TxDOT is going to maintain everything to the west, but who maintains the little patchwork?
That's what I was wondering.
We hear about it pretty quick, especially in the spring from the neighborhood, so we're mowing those. As a matter of fact, we're mowing the entire lot right now, not haggling over the other 40 feet. We're mowing the entire lots and getting it done.
So what can you do with that long term?
It's a good question. Along certain parts of the corridor, the city could, it's an opportunity for the city to go in, and most of all these will be gone, to do some beautification, maybe some trails or something. Certain areas that may more pocket park, or there may be an area too that you may want to think about. This is a strategy we'll be helping you with. You may want to see if an adjacency wants to buy it where there's maybe not be a value to the city. I'll show you one of those in a minute. Okay, so let's keep going. Let's go back to our impacts. So let's go ahead and go on up to, let's kind of come north up past Maine. You start to see the swap here where we're going to get away from the nautical mile. We're going to come back and look at some of these in a minute, how they fall into major or minor categories. So this is College Street that comes in. Let's keep going north. We'll go up to Board Valley Ridge. We're going to come back and look at Home Depot. You kind of see a difference right there between Home Depot and Lowe's, just kind of looking at it. You can start to see some of the dealerships on the east side. Let's keep going north. Orange, of course, mean that's the part that Donna and Nika and Trent were talking about earlier. Those have closed, so they were coming up on 407. Interesting part. This, again, staff made this aerial as kind of a, this is not exact. You see Big Jack's and the old house barbecue. The line does not get into the building there. I think we're a little off there on the skew. I think all of that, for the most part, stays. I'll have to look at the construction plans to be exact. Dave, I don't think Old House Barbecue's taken.
No.
We did this, and we matched their drawings so it would be more educational to us, the public, as a guide. If someone comes in, we always pull up the construction plans. They're harder to read. But you can see the takes on the west side where they flipped away from the nautical mile. Let's go up and look at the residential up here on that cul-de-sac, Steve. So keep going. Okay, Garden Ridge. There's two lots right there off of, what is that street? Something Court. I don't remember the street, but it's basically these two parcels, 26 and 25. The houses are gone. These were some of the earlier ones, along with these. These houses are gone too, I believe, right?
That's correct.
They're closed, and these were pretty much all gone. It's easier for us to maintain them. Of course, everything east of the line is going to be TxDOT, but if you look at these two up here, let's swap over to the arrow right quick if we can.
Sorry, I gotta go.
No, yeah, while he's doing that, it might be something for y'all to start thinking about where there's areas of segmentation. Do you pocket park that, or if someone in adjacency, the law says that if the city wants to sell something like that, it wasn't a park, it's just single family, we obtain it. I think the law says something that if an adjacent owner has a first right of refusal, first right to offer, first right to buy it.
I don't think you're saying about first right, it just says we don't have to go through a bidding procedure.
Okay.
They can.
So the idea is, the guy to the north up here, kind of showing that this guy's approached staff saying, hey, I'd like to buy that. It's next to me, I could have a better side yard. What do y'all say? And he also kind of wants to buy both of them. Now I know if the person down here on Pinehurst, the other house to the south would want to buy that, but again, you see City of Lewisville and those two pieces we currently own. It's an option for you to consider. We may point some of those out. Once we start getting more, we probably ought to have some sort of consolidated plan on how we deal with it, whether it's a pocket park, whether it can be turned into landscaping or some sort of a beautification, whether or not it can be absorbed or maybe sell it to someone.
And that
Who
should be
could use it?
something that comes out in the overlay district.
Yeah. Overlay district.
But
So-
isn't it almost gonna, I think almost gonna need to be taken individually, because some of them would work for pocket parks, some of them you're better off selling it to
Right.
the adjacent property owner.
Exactly.
You're absolutely correct. This thing is almost a parcel by parcel
Yeah,
analysis of what we're gonna have to
do the
do.
right thing, right?
And when we look at the overlay district creation, that's how they're gonna have to look at it, parcel by parcel.
Right. And I understand wanting to have something in place, but boy, it seems to me like it's just gonna be individual.
It is, you're absolutely
Yeah,
correct.
because depending on where the building is and what kind of
Right.
landscape buffer you can get in there or not. and-
Yeah.
What
And-
benefit is it to us in creating that aesthetic appeal, so we need to look at all of
Yeah.
that. So
Right.
not be quick to sell, let's put it
And two, you gotta look at the cost to the city and
That's right.
revenue to the city.
Exactly. That's what.
Correct.
You put a pocket park in, it's gonna cost you
Sure.
money to maintain and this and that. You sell it to an adjacent property owner, brought in revenue.
Right.
So,
I think you're right, and that's exactly right, and that's what Trent has said, that, the cost of maintenance is gonna go up, whether it's a park or whether, but again, I think you'll have a menu, and as time goes on, some homeowners may or may not deed over, so you'll have some of that. So most of these single families buy in and by themselves can't be built upon, so just pointing that out. So that takes you from south and north. You can look at the maps. If you have questions on different ones, Dave and I or Nika or any staff member, we can we can try to answer those, but I wanted you to get a feel of what's going on with the take, how it works, and now we're going to look a little bit of how it impacts properties. What does that mean?
Let me ask you this, on these, when that happens, like those two properties there, you already had one guy wanting to buy it, are they notified when the take next to them is made and now who owns that property? I mean, do they know that the city owns that now?
I don't know that, Mayor, but my guess would be I wouldn't think so. I think they all know of the widening of the freeway and they see what's happening, but I don't know necessarily that they're notified of when that property is closed and or donated back over to the city. I think this individual found it on DCAD because DCAD posts those fairly quickly. It might be a 30-day lag, but we've seen some two-week lags. It's pretty quick.
I doubt they're notified. DCAT has a hard time getting information.
Right. The state's not gonna tell anybody anything.
No. No.
They'll file the deed, that's it.
Okay, so let's look at something that we've been dealing with for actually since 2006 and 7. Y'all have seen it. We've known this has been coming. It was one original big project. Now it's been in 2 pieces, phase 1, phase 2. So staff has been thinking about, and you all have been asking the questions as well, what are we going to do? How does this impact our existing properties? So property impacts, you've seen the line, you've been asking the questions about vacant land, impacts to parking, driveways, deceleration lanes, control of access, our 40-foot on-site maneuvering requirement when you, as a driveway comes in, and that's actually measured from the right-of-way line in. Buildings and structures, landscaping, whether it's your 10-foot strip with trees every 50 linear feet or your interior landscaping percentages with your landscape trees, signage, water and sewer taps, your drainage, your fire protection, your hydrants, your fire lanes, your screening walls, the list goes on. This take impacts one, maybe all or some or none of all of these things. So that's the impact of what's going on. How does it currently work, or what have we been doing, or how does the development process currently work in Lewisville? Well, typically, and y'all know all about engineering site plans. Engineering site plans were born probably in 1989 when Nika got out of college. She broke the fight with all the old timers. She wrote the Unified General Development Ordinance, which took the right and the left hand and married the two and made a one-stop shop approach to development. Took engineering site plans, took final plats, preliminary plats, and made it all make sense and forced all departments to work together as one. That way you don't have a guy on Keeley that gets his building permit, builds his building and goes to get his water line tap, and he finds out it's, you know, a half mile or a mile down Keeley and no one told him. That actually happened about 1986 and it wasn't pretty. So we did
Actually, Nika's first stint with the city of Lewisville. Then she left us.
What's important to note on that, she did all that in spite of legal. That was before you. That was before you. That was before you. That was before you were born then.
Great, now we're gonna have a whole bunch of documents.
remember those
clean up.
objections.
I know what's going on.
So we have the engineering site plan process. Engineering site plans, as you all know, basically are required for all construction of new non-single family buildings, churches, schools, apartments, businesses, condominiums, that's an apartment, everything that's not single family. Townhouse attached, that's single family, just a plat. It's triggered again by that. It's also triggered by any change in the square footage of that building. We have some exceptions. If everything's good on the lot and you're only expanding 10% or 5,000 square feet, go ahead and get your building permit. We'll draw a square on your site plan and have a nice day. Change in required parking or fire protection. Now that's morphed through the years. Basically says that if you were an office building and now you're a retail, well, the parking is more, so you're going to pave it. You're going to impact drainage. You're going to impact fire lanes. So it's required when there's a change for parking or fire protection. We have an exception for fire sprinklers. If you're just sprinkling your building, we don't trip everything else and make you do a site plan, just submit a sprinkler plan. Changing your fire lane or location, site plan it because it's related to parking, maneuvering, and driveways. It's all linked, and you'll think all of these really are linked. Addition, deletion, or alteration of existing driveway. changing grading or drainage, new water or sewer services to the site, and when a property's been vacant for a period of 12 months or more, and it's not compliant with current code, you have to perform an engineering site plan. Engineering site plans are drawn, designed by professional registered civil engineers. When you're in this process, the property must be platted. If it's not, you have to backstroke and do a final plat. But the idea is that an engineering site plan, all requirements of that site have to be complied with. Even though you may just be putting in a new driveway, you're putting in a new water or sewer tap, everything has to be looked at. It trips to all compliance on the site. Y'all have seen those through the years. So that's our current process. We don't think that that's going to be a very efficient or effective way to address these issues up and down the corridor. Certainly it's going to be fairly hard for properties to do that in general. We don't think it would be necessarily a very fast or clear process. We've done a few. We'll show you a few of those in a minute, some of the examples. But what we've instead have looked at is going to an I-35 impact ordinance, adding a chapter in the Code of Ordinances that deals with properties up and down the corridor. And I have to give credit for Claire Swan, because she took this, again, where we bogged down, she took it and with her knowledge has really helped give us some draft ideas on how to do this and how the best way to do it to propose to y'all should you want to do it. What would the I-35 property impact ordinance apply to? It would apply to any parcel or tract that's been physically touched along the corridor that's been left non-compliant by the acquisition or purchase of property. Some exceptions, we looked at this a minute ago. It wouldn't apply to a single-family residence so long as the residence not deemed substandard. You know, they don't chop off the back half and leave it open air. But some of those you saw in Harbor where they take a good portion of the backyard, but there's still enough backyard left. The house is still there. We're not going to go out there and knock on their door and say, hey, you have to do a new plan for us, and we're not going to attack that yet. I think the overlay district will address that. Where we can, we're going to leave those alone for now.
When you say I-35 project, you mean the project in toto, parts 1 and 2?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Again, that's a good question. Again, keep in mind, as we talked earlier, that the acquisition process is going to go on for years. It may be in year 8 from now, still acquiring. So this will, if you go down the road and you want to consider and you approve an I-35 impact ordinance, it'll be consolidated into probably the overlay district as a working document as a part of that.
Does it make sense to limit this to just the I-35 project and not just create any TxDOT road? Because we could have this same issue happen at another state road at some point in the future.
We did that on Main Street years ago, and of course we didn't have, when we did the east side of Main, when they widened it, and the west side, we didn't have necessarily the GDO or the thought process we have now. A lot of the precedents weren't there. It's a good idea. I think we can take a look at it.
I know we've got a speed to market on this that you guys are trying to
And
achieve.
that's what I was about to say. We probably want to go in and put it in place for I-35, and if something else came about you wanted to apply it to, then we could do an expansion at that time.
I think it'd be a heck of a benchmark to use that and approach that other as it happens. This is again the take. Dave, current right-of-way for I-35 width?
Somewhere in the neighborhood of 220 feet on average.
And we're going to?
400.
Is that from side to side?
Yeah, full width.
Full width.
So again, that's pretty unprecedented. That's a huge widening. Main Street was about 20 feet, maybe 30 feet. That's big either side, but this is something that's we won't see
And you
again.
don't see anything else that has this type of impact.
Doubling the size, doubling the width. Because other exceptions, vacant land, Nika talked about that. If it's vacant, this ordinance or this process wouldn't apply. You would go back to the full engineering site plan, and again, ultimately in a year or so, we'll have an overlay district. And again, if you've been vacant, or if you've been vacant for 12 months or longer and it's developed, you'll go through the engineering site plan process, conventional process for now until we get the overlay district.
On the single family thing, are you doing that not do anything to them, even if they turn around and sell the house?
If they sell a house to another resident or whatever, that's their business. I don't see us intervening in that. If they sell it to a commercial property, then that would be a change of use and would trigger that remainder to go through the process.
Why I was saying, because they've been paid fully for their property.
Yes.
So they see their backyard and get cut to nothing or basically nothing. They said, well, we're already paying, well, now we're gonna sell it to somebody else, and they know they get this piece. We still adhere to the fact that they can sell that property.
As long as
As long as it's
As long as
residential.
as long as the residential use continues, we're not involved in the sale. Again, you're not expanding a non-conforming use by that, it's just a transfer of ownership. It'd be really no different than a leftover commercial piece transferring it from Ferris to Nika or something.
I would guess, Mayor, though, their market would be pretty slim on who would want to buy that piece of property.
But they could take a really reduced, they've already been paid
Oh,
once, so they could sell it for half
Sure,
of
very
that.
handsomely for it.
I'll say, a lot of the properties already are rental. So if they can rent it and there's only 2 feet out the back door,
They don't care.
they will. If they can't, it'll come down and just be vacant land, because they don't want the maintenance issue. But they will rent it if they can.
Yeah, but then you look at that $24.99, there's some large homes over there that don't have about a 10-foot backyard.
Right.
Now, they're still there.
Okay, so now we're gonna kind of look and kind of start to creep into, looking on my time, how am I doing on time? Okay.
You're good.
So this is kind of going to play into the parcel impact maps you saw earlier, where full and partial, that we're going to drill it down a little bit. We're going to categorize the properties, depending upon the severity of the impact, as either a minor or major impact. And this is something that's pretty difficult because it gets exponential very quick on how this is going to work, betting on us looking at it versus what maybe could happen. As the mayor says, somebody buys it, somebody redoes it, somebody tears it down on their own, somebody morphs it into something else. But we're going to start with this. Minor impacts, again, are going to be very beneficial. It's going to give some flexibility and a more streamlined approval process, not only to the property owner, but to staff. And the major impacts, we're going to take through an engineering site plan process. Let's look at a minor impact site. Means that a site that's been impacted by I-35, but not toward the extent of the viability and the functionality of the site becomes unusable, or the buildings have been affected. We've tried to qualify with some examples of what would be a minor impact site summary. Claire, if I get out of line, object and abstain, or whatever, just jump in there.
She's ready.
Shut me down.
Got a long stick.
Example, the first example would be where you've lost up to 15% of your required parking. And again, keeping in mind, we would bench that back to the most current engineering site plan or the latest building expansion. We wouldn't discriminate and say we're not going to take something that's built in 1990 and throw the current parking code. That wouldn't be fair. So we're going to go back to the latest engineering site plan or the latest building expansion and compare that. So
And
again,
Eric, you have some properties that date pretty far back when you start looking at what plans they would be.
we do. If a building was built prior to the GDO, then we'll go back to the building permit. We'll go back to what was fair, what we know, and we'll make that call the best we can with them. That's the first item. The second would be landscaping. If you lose 15% or less of your required landscaping, that would be a minor impact site, and we'll talk about that a little bit more as we look at the examples. The third one is minimal changes to utilities, such as I've got a water tap here, a sewer tap here. Now, I've got to put it over here. Well, that's not that big a deal, so it'd be a minor. We need to know because there could be easements, there could be other issues. We need a plan, and we'll talk about what that's going to look like in a minute, but that would be an example. Your driveway, it's here, now it's here. Screening, your fire lane location, well, it used to curve here, but it curves over here, and it still gets you compliance. It's an adjustment they can make and make whole. Not much else is affected. These are intended to be more individual type elements or public improvements that do not increase the degree of the property's non-compliance. Now, it still doesn't mean that you may not have a variance coming to you and we're gonna talk about where we're going next, and it doesn't mean you won't have a variance, because they could shift a driveway with a decel lane on it, and if they move it, and they have to move that driveway, now they can't get a decel lane, and it's no fault of theirs. Well, the driveway's cool, but there's no decel lane anymore, so that might be a variance, but it'd be one we'd probably come to you and with support saying they can't help it. It's a take beyond their doing, so.
Unless it was a safety issue.
Yeah, unless it's a
Well, that's what I was
safety.
getting
Well,
ready to say.
we're gonna talk about that in a minute. We'll go there and we're gonna show you some of that, how that works.
On that 15% parking, will you also be looking at that as far as, okay, it's an old piece of property for the GDO,
Yes, sir.
and they only were required 10 parking spaces. We'll say, I'm just using numbers.
How many?
10.
Yes, sir.
They were only required 10. Today, they'd be required 25. But back then, when they were did, there was only 10. They lose 15%, so they lose 2 parking spaces. But now, to keep that business full, they're gonna have to park somewhere. And so they're gonna be parking on the side streets in front of people's houses and stuff. How do we look at that also? You see what I'm saying?
Yes, sir, we did. Again, the way this is crafted is we would bench it back to that most current site plan, or we'll show Huffines Plaza. That, you know, that's in the 60s. Maybe Rudy, what was Huffines? At least it was
Right
there.
next to the interstate was built.
Yeah. So Huffines Plaza is going to lose a few parking spaces. They weren't probably required any back then. So we'll take a look at it. We're smaller, Mayor. I think we threw the 15% out as a reach. We had it at 25, but we carved it back. I think we'll have to take a look at those. But right now, as it stands, they're at this point, they can't help it. It's not a take. It's definitely not a full acquisition. They're not into the building. They haven't been paid in full. So from what we can tell, we haven't seen many of those that would cause parking to be a traffic problem or encroach into the neighbor's unwanted that we've looked at. It's a good question. And this number, 15%, especially parking, was the line that staff felt comfortable with, where we may not get into the situation you're talking about. If it's 25%, you're gonna have people complaining, saying, hey, you know, they're over here parking in my parking lot, they're not, you know, because they were squeezed out. The problem is, when you, in this type of situation, keep in mind that the actions going on their property are not on their own. They're not expanding because they want to, like we talked about here, where we make them comply. It's a new day. This isn't necessarily a new day for them. It's
Not
what's,
something they voluntarily went out and did.
it's a good question, and we're going to be watching that. Keep in mind, when we get through this, we'll probably be bringing this back to you several times for amendments, just like we did the GDO. Even though Nika wrote it really great in '89, we
And then
came
left
back.
us.
We came back every 12 months.
Too much credit, too much
We
credit.
amended this thing about every year, and we amend code. The codes are amended that way. We did it for for 10 years. We kept amending it. Let's continue on. The way this will work is the city will notify the owner that he shall submit an I-35 modified site plan within 60 days of being notified. Now, that can be notified by us or after something is triggered, we see something happening on the property. An I-35 modified site plan is going to be a plan drawn by a professional engineer. It's going to have sheet size, north arrow, meets and bounds. It's going to have the property corners, but it's only going to address the deficiency that the state caused. You lose your driveway, well, then that's all we want to see. Now, we may want to see some easements, corner clips, radiuses, and some control things or anything tied to that driveway, but it's not going to be, they once said I can't use this, but it's not the dog pile effect of everything complying on the site. I did it anyway. So it's going to be a simpler plan. It could be anywhere from $1,000 to maybe $5,000. It's not much, but it's an intelligent plan that addresses the issue, whether it's a water or sewer line tweak, whether it's a fire lane tweak, or maybe it's 2 or 3 of those smaller ones, or hey, I'm losing 4 spaces, but I want to pave over here. Rather than just say, well, go ahead and do it, we need a plan. So we're going to call it an I-35 modified site plan tied to a minor impact. Again, this is a reach where if the property's not platted, which a lot of them are, most of them are, we're going to ask that property be platted. Why? Because it's a better survey. It puts it in lot and block format. It shows the easements. It shows any impediment on that lot more clearly than just a paper bag survey they may bring us. So a final plat's pretty important. So we're going to ask that be platted. Staff authorize approvals without going to council. Again, the things you just saw, this will be built into the code, where you're not going to be seeing these little penny items of, hey, I lost one parking space, I fell below. So we're going to build that into the ordinance, so the 15% to parking, the landscaping, and the adjustments here, we'll build that in where staff can approve it and go on down the road. We'll swap over to a major impact site. There's going to be two parts of this. Basically means to the point where the viability and the functionality of the site and the buildings have been affected. Some examples of this, and then we're going to go extreme here in a little bit. We're going to take 16% or more of your required parking, and again, we're not going to come to the current code. We're going to bench it off of when you were built. So if you're 16% or more, you're a major. Same with landscaping, and then landscaping is an aggregate total of the property. Number 3, an impact that requires destruction, demolition, taking down, or removal of any portion of existing structure. And what we're talking about there is an enclosed building. They're into the building. You saw that at Abuelos. You saw it at Frankie's. They're into those buildings. You'd be a major. 4th, and here's where we're gonna cross over into a little different element of a major. An impact that creates any unsafe conditions such as inadequate or inoperable fire protection systems. You've lost your fire lane and can't get it back. You've lost your second point of access. It's required. You cannot get it back. Sanitary sewer lines, water lines, electrical, or site access. There's 1 or 2, my understanding, that they're not giving access to. Don't know how that's going, but I can show you after the meeting. One, I know in particular that's what the guy's telling us. That's why we're working with TxDOT. But this number 4 is when they've created an unsafe condition. I would say 99.999% of those are going to be full acquisitions, and they will not. Probably, if these happen, then they can't survive. You have to go away and redevelop accordingly. Number 5, a definition. You've been fully acquired. Again, number 5 kind of hands back into what's happening with the site. It means it's fully acquired. You can survive, but you gotta do a site plan to prove it or to substantiate it. We'll come back to that in a minute.
Aaron, spend a few minutes telling the council how, from what we know today, how many of the takes are major versus minor?
From what staff has looked at, we've got 175 80 parcels in Lewisville that have been physically impacted. My understanding from TxDOT, from Whitlock to 380, there's 600 approaching 850 parcels impacted in some way. So in Lewisville, 175 80 parcels, it's nearly 2 to 1 major, 94-ish to 47 to minors. We have around 28 vacant properties, no development on them that have been impacted. So nearly 2 to 1. 56% of them would be major. 28%, rough numbers, would be minor, with a 17% left over as being vacant but impacted. Now that's our best guess as how we're taking a snapshot in time of what the property looks like at the acquisition.
Of those, how many have already been taken and done? Like I'm thinking of the little Mexican restaurant right there in Lakeland Plaza. It used to be Tia's. Remember that? It's gone.
Yes, sir. I would say of the commercial, 8 or 10 tracks, maybe a few more. We're going to look at some of those in a minute. We'll look at that one specifically. We'll look at the old Spanish Trails Inn that are already down.
So that means a high percentage of these properties we're going to have an opportunity to look at in full with an engineering site plan. And then you have that overlay district and you start being able to really get some significant change.
Right. And if I remember that item 3 that you just had on that last deal where it was a partial take of the property,
Steve,
of the building
Steve,
itself,
back.
that already happened to you on one of the hotel motels that
Yes,
we
sir.
have, and they wanted to remain open.
Yes, sir.
And we're like, no.
Spanish Trail.
We'll talk. We have that as an example, but yes, sir, you're exactly right. So let's go. Let's push on. So again, this will work similar, the same way. Within 60 days, we're seeking notice from the city. You've got to submit an engineering site plan. Again, addressing all the changes on the entire site, including their I-35 deficiency, to bring it into compliance with current day code if a major is impacted. Again, we're going to ask that the property be platted. As a sidebar, items of note, keep in mind that the way it's going to work when the building's touched, buildings physically changed, touched, exterior finish should be brought into city code. Now this is going to be probably a little different from the overlay district, but right now the city code under 6181 says that if you expand your building up to 0 to 35%, you can match the existing finish. 35 to 50, 50% of your building has to come up to code. 50 or more, the entire building comes up to code. And where you'll see in a few of these, it probably wouldn't be very fair if they're not doing this, that if a 10 by 10 foot section of the west and the north elevation was cut into, but it's 200,000 square foot, you probably wouldn't ask them to brick the entire building. We don't do it now. We probably can't go there now with this either. So what we are going to do is say you have to meet current code. The overlay district,
Same percentages apply.
same percentages for now. The overlay district brings about some opportunities to address that, especially if it's self-initiated outside of the acquisition process. The idea here is that they have to meet current code. Signage.
What is the change that the overlay district would add
The
to
overlay.
that scenario you just?
The overlay. Nikki, you want to address that?
Sure. Well, the overlay district will look at a much more longer planning range in terms of not just the immediate impact, what's going to happen, what if the site redevelops in the future to something else. So it's going to, lack of a better word, add more requirements. It's going to have more enhanced requirements than we currently have. And it will probably be coupled with, and of course Trent is going to go into that, with an incentive package. So we'll get a lot more out of the building that has potential to, to redo with the overlay district versus our current code, which is basically black and white.
But in the meantime, we'd be using the same percentages.
Correct.
Right.
Until that overlay district is in
Because
place.
the overlay district is basically creating a new code. So at that time, when we say compliance with city code, that's going to be our new code.
Just like you've done in Old Town.
Both, exactly.
So on
It's
the,
just changing requirements.
since you bring in the Old Town, even if either before you get the overlay into place, or if you didn't have an overlay, if you weren't going to overlay in a certain area, could we not do an incentive program that for a particular business to upgrade for the frontage to upgrade to a brick or whatever you like we were talking
Taking
about?
all this together.
Absolutely. And you remember during this budget process, I asked you to set aside a percentage,
Right.
which is around $760,000 just specifically for those type of incentives.
Okay.
Another important thing, we've dealt with this before, but signs. If the idea in this ordinance would be that if that sign is removed, reconstructed, relocated, adjusted, then the entire sign has to come into compliance with the sign ordinance. Now that can happen with or without an engineering site plan or an I-35 modified plan. Example, they may have a corner clip. Everything's good. There's no impact beyond code, but the sign has to go. It has to be relocated. So we can deal with that through a sign or through the sign permit, but we will get, you might get some pushback here. But the way we're gonna reach here a little bit to say you've got to meet current code. Again, maybe they've been paid in full by the sign. A lot of these people, it's a full contact sport, kind of like oil and gas wells. Again, that may come into a background memo if we find out, but again, the way we're approaching this to reach is that if the sign moves, then it has to meet compliance. So that's going to be freestanding signs, could be a monument sign, could be directionals, or it could be building signage. If that building's touched, then we're going to look at it. So signage in general, we're going to look at it that way, and we're going to go that direction. We can always retreat, but right now we're going to reach and go that direction with
So
the
they've been
ordinance.
paid for having that sign already?
They may have been. That's,
What I just heard you say is, let's say a building gets a little corner tuck, but sign doesn't get touched. They got signage on the wall somewhere else.
if the sign's not touched or altered or whatnot, then I don't know yet. That's a good question, but my off-the-cuff answer would be probably wouldn't go there unless the wall signage had been hit. If the building's touched, but the pole sign is not, and it's still non-conforming, then I don't, we probably, this is gonna be more one-on-one, is the sign actually impacted or not?
Gotcha.
But now the billboard signs are handled differently, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, billboards, this is not including billboards.
That's
correct?
correct.
Right.
This is on.
Y'all have already been dealing with
Right.
those.
An example is the old Garden Bridge, it's called At Home now.
Right.
So they took a little piece right there and their sign will have to move back. I don't know if they've already done it or not, because I know they refaced the sign. So basically that sign has to comply with code. This is-
But then they have to.
And what did we, that's not considered a billboard sign though, right? That's just a
No,
pole
that's
sign.
just a-
Oh, freestanding sign.
And when we did the electronic stuff for the billboard signs, that did not include pole signs, right?
No,
On
no,
35?
sir. No, sir, not on 35 it did, no, sir. So how does it work with regard to enforcement and compliance dates? Again, we have kind of two brackets under the submittal process. The first one is minor and major, where the site is deemed safe. In other words, we're not going to go in there and say, send all your employees home, you got to shut down until you get compliance. We're going to live with this for a while, whether it's a minor or major. You're going to be notified of your 60 days, and then you're going to have 6 months to get your plan approved. As long as you're going through the process in good faith. The ordinance may have a provision where staff can give an extension to that process, but we're going to give them 6 months to go through either a minor I-35 modified site plan or an engineering site plan, the full Monty, and final plat, or whatever else is going on. We're going to give them 6 months if you're safe. Second bullet, if that major impact site is deemed unsafe for occupancy or use, then we're going to give compliance that you shall shut down immediately. Now, it doesn't mean they can't come back with a site plan and try to make it whole, but it's unsafe for them to be there. And hopefully we won't be in that situation. Most places like that, I think they're asking us already. Like the Spanish Trails and some of those where they lost everything and they pretty much shut down. So that's during the submittal process, how that works. We think it's a fair and a reasonable way to approach that. After the approval, you're going to have 12 months to build it. We can tighten that if you're uncomfortable with that, but right now it's similar to the GDO, but we're going to give them 12 months to deal with it because it's something, again, they didn't plan on. Some of these acquisitions they know about well in advance, and we're hearing that some they approach, or if a property owner just buys it, they may not know. So they're getting hit right there. So we feel like 12 months is reasonable. And again, it's safe to let them build their final plan. Obviously, they may have a gravel driveway or something temporary until they can build their permanent one when TxDOT takes it out and to get the new one in. But 12 months is what we're looking at. If you're denied,
Eric,
yes, sir.
12 months, is that major and minor or major?
Right now, I believe it's both, Councilman.
Is there a way to put a shorter timeline on minor?
Yes, sir. We can.
As I see this, you've got a 6-month window of
Right.
submittal process, which could be expanded to 12 months, which then we've got a 12-month after that. So we could talk about 2 years.
It's the way we've looked at it now. We can tighten that. I think we can give you some options, maybe, and bring that back. And again, I think Councilman Ferguson, is good.
Anything we do, they always tell you it's 18 to 24 months. I mean,
Is it being done by JC?
They always do 24 months.
Yeah, that would be
Don't
36.
bring
Delete
that
that.
back, please.
So we could come back on a minor and say 6 to 8 months or 6 months. We'll take a look at that and bring you some other things back as we get closer to this. But it's a
Tighten it up
good
for
comment.
minors.
If-
So I heard two different things, tighten it up to the minor or?
That's what I was asking
Well,
for.
let's do a straw poll on a minor, knowing it
No,
might.
let's try
No,
those.
Okay, can't do that, sorry. We'll bring you back some options on that.
But can I just hear, what did you specifically want?
A shorter timeline for minor.
Minor.
And I think that's all you need to do is bring back like your current proposal, and then you could have another proposal that would shorten the time frame for minor.
And we've got to be ready to change that too as a variance, because you're gonna have a situation, they have to move their sign now, but something's gonna change in phase 2 or 2A or 2Q somewhere.
Good.
There's going to be all kinds of
This
things that
is-
are going to occur that we
There's no
cannot
money
foresee at this
basically for
point.
2 yet.
No, two's never gonna happen. We've already had that
It's
conversation.
gonna happen, but
We'll be
you
dust
gotta
by
remember,
then.
what's going on at 407 was supposed to have been done 15 years ago,
Yes, sir.
something like that.
Yeah.
So it's, and right now, there's no money, at least the money was involved in 407.
There is
It was
money.
there.
They just freed up 1.1 billion.
Shoot, that's not even, that couldn't
It's not-
even
was
do
it
the
over
first
the
phase of
top
what's going on now on 35. Just remember that.
The one thing they are doing, correct me if I'm wrong, Dave, but the takes they are taking, the line won't move twice. 99.999%. They were gonna do that, but what they're taking, if they take it, it's the ultimate right of way.
You're talking about the 440 that he was talking
Yes,
about
sir.
ago.
Yes.
Yeah.
You know, there was concern a couple of years ago that phase one would be this, then in a few more years it's this. Well, they've not gone down that road. Now, there may be some,
Until it changes.
until it changes,
Gone down that
maybe
road.
some quirks or corner clips, but again, the idea is the ultimate. After, let's say that your I-35 modified plan or engineering site plan has been denied for whatever reason. They come to y'all with a bunch of variances, hey, we don't want a fire lane, we don't want a driveway. Well, you know, either way, you'll have 3 months to get the site in compliance, to bring the site in compliance. Of course, the idea there is you have 3 months to either go away, scrape and clean, or abate the issue. Now, they still could be occupied. If it's safe, you'll have 3 months to move, or to redesign, or to get an approved plan, or to not be there. So that's how that would work.
Is this where you're also handling the, because you said you were going to look at the safety of the no-turn lane, or decel lane, I'm sorry?
Safety issue would be considered.
Up in this process, during the 6 months, they'll be working toward getting a variance or whatever from y'all, or designing it incorrect. That'll be up in the 6 months. But if they fail and they don't make that 6 months on the plan review, and if after denial, they'll have 3 months to bring the site in compliance after denial, or scrape and clean and go away.
Well, Mayor, if it's an unsafe situation, they have to come into immediate compliance, or they have to cease operation.
Okay, and that's why I was asking about the decel lane. Right now, they don't have a decel lane, yet with the take, and it's a major, they'd be required to do because they have to comply to the new ordinance, correct, if it's a major. They don't have a decel lane, they're going to basically have to put in a decel lane, but we had talked about earlier, because of the take, it may not be viable for them to put in a decel lane. So that's why I was kind of wondering, how do you operate then, how do you operate then for immediate shutdown?
It's a good question. I think if it's, again, it will rely a lot on the expertise of the traffic, or the engineers we have on board to say, is it safe? If it's a high occupancy property, and that decel, you have traffic in and out, and the speed, and where it is in the quarter, looking at your viewpoints, looking at your corner clips, looking at your control of access points, if we deem it that it's just not safe, then we'll make that call. If it's something with lower volumes, we'll have to make that call when we get there. And I just threw that out. I don't know if we have many of those, but we'll bring those to you as they're designed. It's a good question.
There's other ways to potentially deal with that too, though, because you could have circumstances where if that happens, by requiring a mutual access easement between two existing, we might be able to eliminate the need for two accesses and create mutual access, which would take advantage of an existing decel lane. So there's a lot of different ways to slice that up.
And to do that, you have to get compliance from the adjacent property.
Yeah, that's right. We'd have to work with the adjacent property owner, but there's ways to get that without costing any money.
And we do
That
this
actually
type
could be
of
helpful.
thing.
Yeah, we've got several of them throughout
Yeah,
the
we
city.
do that now.
That's a good idea.
And from a property owner standpoint, some of them may abandon the building if that becomes too much of an issue.
Yeah.
Because if they don't have the decel lanes and all that stuff, people will say, I'm not gonna bother going
In
there.
there. Right.
So you have that side
That's
of
true.
it too.
Absolutely. And again, with parking too, same thing. So let's look at a few examples that we've identified. And again, these are going to be minors. Is this the first one?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, so this is Corporate Drive, and this is the Best Western, number 80. All they do is, on this one, is just they clip a little bit of their landscaping and a couple of parking spaces. It's less than 15%. So this would be an example of a minor impact. They're going to lose a few spaces, some of their landscaping, but they're still good on the rest of the property. Probably the same is true over here on the little strip center, but this would be an example of a minor I-35 modified site plan that they would bring in. Let's go to the next one. This one is going to be on the border, but you can look at, on the border is 73. I think our line is cheated in. When we looked at this one, it doesn't show quite there. I think they lose 4 or 5 spaces on the north, kind of the northwest corner right in there. They lose some of their landscape strip, but they still have a large percentage of green and trees on their lot, but it would be less than 15%. Their driveway is, they'll get a driveway, so that's not an issue, but again, that would probably be an example of a minor for on the border. Doesn't get into the building, that is phase 2, by the way.
This might be one too, that as you get your overlay district in place, you may have some type of incentive program to do additional landscapes and beautification.
I noticed they made sure they didn't mess with Hooters. I'm sorry.
They probably hang out there.
Well, that's another good example. You see the clip on Hooters there on the southwest corner. I wasn't sure what that was, but thanks for the color commentary there. So you see a little bit of clip them there on the control of access, so the corner clips coming into the little access easement there. And then they clip a little of the landscaping on the northwest corner, but again, that would be a minor impact. Let's go to the next one.
Are there signs right there on that corner you just pointed out? I don't remember. There's not.
I think there are.
So that would be.
Full sign there.
So, there.
So that wouldn't be, I was just looking at an example, what you were talking about.
I see the shadow up here on the other one north. Their pole sign looks like it's right there, so probably not. And they're probably less than 60 feet tall anyway. I don't think those signs are above 60, and they're probably not over the square footage. Let's go to the next one. So this was the old Wild Ginger. It's called something else, but again, corner clip for them, a little bit, 1 or 2 spaces I think there, but again, they're, for the most part, they're very survivable. Same thing across the street, as you can see. No, yeah, it's okay. We just talked about that one.
So on that, go back to the picture, where that red line is, basically, is that, how much from that red line going west, I guess, yeah, you'd be going west, how much is there gonna be, or is there gonna be any green grass?
Parkway.
And then all concrete, parkway and then all concrete, or is it just be all
Parkway
concrete?
between the right-of-way line and the curb line of the 11, 12 feet?
Yeah, just grass.
No, but the distance between the right-of-way line and the back of curb of Service Road is 11, 12 feet, Dave?
Oh, at least, in some places more.
In some places, but some places be right up against it, right?
No, you'll have some space between the back of curb and the right of way. I mean,
But like for where the boat dealerships are now, there's no space there.
We'll take a look at that. Yeah, they're, well, where they modified, where they shifted, but ideally they want at least, you know, 10 or 11 feet of parkway between that property line and the edge of curb. And
Yeah,
again,
they
they may squeeze down to 7, but
they've set their new right of way based on some distance behind the future curb.
Okay.
because they'll have to have a radius and again, some separation there. Although it, you know, it doesn't look like much when you're going down the service road, but. So let's continue on. We got another minor impact. Now this is the one, kind of an example that the mayor had brought up earlier of a site that's been there. This is Lakeland Plaza. I think our line's cheated in just a bit, but you can see on the west side where the green line is, that's the take. And there's not much take here. They do lose some landscaping. The driveways, they have 1, 2, 3 on the service road. We may look at that and try to, as Mr. Petty was talking about, maybe consolidate some of those. But this will be a minor. Their parking's intact. Remember, y'all did an incentive and a program with them to do some interior landscaping. They had 0 back when I used to catch the bus to the Davis Fun Farm, but they put in the tree islands here. That's not
That was before Nika graduated.
I believe that qualifies as
That was
color
before
commentary.
Liz's birth.
Rudy knows what I'm talking about.
I got on the bus too. Eric, that's Huffines, isn't it?
It's Huffines Plaza.
Okay.
So again, this will be a minor take. It's going to trim off some of their landscaping they put on the service road, but again, they weren't required any in the first place. They still have landscaping. Be a minor impact. They'll build their driveways back probably, but we're going to work with them to try to consolidate those, but a minor impact to a large old center.
Nico?
I just wanted to say, actually, the landscaping was part of the incentive package, the last time we
The
wanted to.
interior landscape.
No, the front
The front-
landscaping as
front-
well. So
Both,
we like them to
both.
do. to come
But
back and read.
I'll tell you, the big concern I have through all of this is
Right.
that you walk through all this, you lose that curbside landscaping, whatever we call that, and now we just look like a big strip of
Big strip
concrete.
of concrete, I know, and that's what the overlay
That's the
district
overlay
would
district
address.
purpose.
But you definitely have a hammer with the ones that we give an incentive to, because that's part of that incentive package.
Okay.
This is a perfect example, I think, for future looking at what an incentive plan and working with the tenants can work. I mean, if y'all look back at this place 5, 7 years ago, that shopping center didn't look near that nice. Now, the parking lot still needs some improvement, but the facility itself didn't look near that nice. You had all those people hanging out there all day. It was not a attractive looking area. It's full now. It's, the tenants, I mean, it's completely occupied and it looks much nicer. And I can tell you the surrounding tenants, to be exact, the Huffines and stuff are much happier with the way it looks, and your surrounding people are much happier with the way it looks. And it's all because you did it, you worked on it.
But more than that, the value of that property, we estimated a 30% increase when we did that. So it means that we probably have to give a little more, but because we're giving them, percentage of the property value back. But the value has almost increased by 75%,
Which is more tax dollars.
which is a lot more than what we had anticipated.
That's a great example there to always show.
We talked about this one. This is where we're going to look at some majors, and there's quite a few. Again, it's 2 to 1. They're into the building on Abuelos, 21, and the same for Frankie's next door. Both are fulls. Again, by definition, you've got a building encroachment. You've lost 50 or 60, 70% of your required parking. You've lost your landscaping. That's going to be a tough site to redevelop. And again, could somebody take this and build a small building and survive? Maybe, probably. They could. Would it be viable with the cost of the property? Probably not. Is it attractive for Garden Ridge or whoever this is to buy them? Maybe. But again, this will be reverted back to the property owner, and again, it'll be one of those strategies that will come into the overlay district to deal with. But this will be a major impact on Abuelos. Same for Frankie's. Again, in these conditions, TxDOT has told us that this building will be taken down. It's not built to be torn down in half like we're going to see what the mayor's talking about on Spanish Trails. That building's going to come down. With or without the owners, they're going to take it down. So that'll go away, scraping clean, and what we're working with them right now to make sure they take out the concrete, get it where someone can mow it.
And all that purple is one owner, right?
Purple is part of Lake Point or Garden Ridge. That's part of a bigger lot back here that Garden
So
Ridge.
they could, in essence, like you said, buy those remaining pieces of property and then use the existing property they have and come in and put another development on it.
I would. I mean, it's consolidation.
And that's where it's so important for that overlay district and to be out there talking to the owners about those very things.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, Brook Hollow. This is a partial, as the,
This one's
As they
bizarre.
ran out all their tenants.
yeah, this one's
This one
going
is
to be
bizarre.
a hybrid. Let's look at the physical characteristics of what's going on. They've lost more than 15% of the required parking. And again, remember parking, 9 by 18 perpendicular space and 24-foot required maneuvering. So it's not necessarily the space, too. In this case, you can see they've lost their drive aisle.
Yeah.
So you can't get in a 9 by 18 unless you have 24-foot maneuvering. So again, they've lost their landscaping, they've lost their parking and drive aisles. And another hit here, 2 points of access required for a high rise. You have one there, that drive is going away and they won't get it back. They won't get a drive. This will be their only remainder drive. So as it would exist, if they were to, I'll come back to phase 2 of what's happening here, but if they were to do this and take that drive out and they weren't made whole, they would have to cease operation of this building because of its unsafe condition and fire code. And what's really happening here is that this will be a major impact. So what we've been told is what's going on here is they've been paid in full. They've been paid in full for the demolition of the building, but TxDOT is only going to keep this portion up here on the west side. They'll give back to Brook Hall the remainder. And so, in addition to that, that's phase 2. So they're in, if you read this now, they're in negotiations for acquisition of this and it's going through. We hear that they will lease back the parking to Brook Hollow until that's physically needed. 6, 8, 10, never, whenever. We don't know when that is. So nothing's going to physically change here. Ownership will. You'll see the ownership change. So that'll give us time to work with them to say, hey, you know, if I were y'all, I'd be talking to a neighbor and get me a mutual access easement, as Mr. Petty talked about, get my second connection.
I don't think you can on that side, isn't the topo there, isn't that like an 8-foot drop off?
They can. It can be done. They could get a secondary access somewhere. That's for their discovery. Get a secondary access for their fire lane as well as their own internal maneuvering. They'd probably want it, but we've looked at it. It's possible they can do it. So that right there, it takes you out of the fire lane issue, as Mr. Vaughn would appreciate. Now, can they go in and get a shared parking agreement to make up the parking that they're going to need for that site? I don't know. They could work an agreement over here. If they do, then there's an engineering site plan that meets code. Then they go on.
For full take, they could build a parking garage.
That's already been split.
And demolition.
Yeah. And demolition they were paid. So, or could they tear off the 4th floor or do something, not lease it? So there's all types of ways for this property to survive. It's up to them.
Right.
They may tear the whole building down. They're the property, and we'd have no say in that. They may do that. I don't know if they will or won't, but this is a hybrid. It's a major, but it's one that's interesting that it could be dangerous. Personally, I think there's a multitude of ways to avoid a lot of the other situations.
If they came and tore the whole building down and put it in later, sold it, somebody developed something, it still has to have dual access. That dual driveway there is not considered a dual access?
No, sir, because if you have they're too close together. It's half the distance of the longest diagonal served. The driveways have to be like in multifamily or these high density or high rise. Your access points need to be. You take the longest diagonal, take half of that. That's where the distance between the two drives for high occupancies for high rise, multifamily, or situations like that. If you had an incident right here, you got a lot of people that can't get out.
Okay.
It's a fire code thing. Let's go to another major real quick. Home Depot. Home Depot's here. We got Valley Ridge, West Side. They're into the outside display. Now, again, this is phase 2. So they've lost parking. They're into their display. Now, Home Depot, we can see it here, Steve, we don't have to go. Home Depot owns this tract to the west. They're proactive. They're already talking to us. What the latest is they're going to build a new store to the west, up here, face it east to the interstate. They'll get it built. There'll be an opportunity, again, as Nika and Mr. Petty are going to talk about, to maybe get a better looking building, do something with the outside display storage, and do what you've seen of the others. But they'll build that building, get it set, then they'll tear this building down.
So, let me ask this. Looks like there's a lot of tree there. So, is there a tree mitigation that you could waive for them to do a better building?
Could be certainly part of the negotiation,
See what I'm
absolutely.
saying?
Yeah.
To waive the tree mitigation, say that we want a nice looking building.
A lot of possibilities.
Absolutely.
We want something like that pretty that they've got over in farm now.
Yes, we do.
Because that's a good looking facade they put on that one.
And that's not the only place they build.
No,
Farm
it's
out?
not. That's just the closest.
But they put it back there so you couldn't see it, and then they cut down all the trees.
You know, there was that too. But if they gotta cut down the trees here anyway.
Yeah, terrible performance.
Lowe's, just for
Yes, it
grants,
is.
Lowe's on the side of your maps, you'll see Lowe's is barely touched, so it's kind of funny how that works.
Yeah.
Okay, next one, Steve. IHOP. This actually is a lot better than we initially thought.
Yeah.
We heard they were going to be left with 7 spaces, but again, they lose a lot of parking. They lost their drive aisle. So again, it's not just the parking; it's that drive aisle that's exponentially tied to it.
Mm-hmm.
So they're fairly damaged there. That's going to be a major one. Landscaping, parking, drive aisles. They're going to have tough time dealing with the leftovers. So
Haven't they told us that they're going to move?
IHOP indicates that they can't survive with that little of parking. I think we would all agree that they probably can't either with that type of a restaurant. And it doesn't mean that somebody couldn't come back in
Put something.
and put an office or a lesser required parking, but it'd be a change of use. You're going back to your site plan, full site plan, and you'd be looking at it. But IHOP's major.
What about the taco place there in the yellow?
Same thing, that's
Total
a,
take,
That's a
right?
total.
Right.
they're into the building,
I'll have to call
Taco
you back
Bueno.
on that.
So they're gonna have that, there's gonna be empty space right next door to.
That's why I'm saying, why don't you?
Why
see
do
the
they
consolidation.
pull their parking lot?
You might see another joint venture consolidation there. Again, brings about opportunities for gathering to redevelop for
Well, I could stay there, just move their parking lot, buy that piece there and move their parking lot.
perhaps, you know, that's for
Maybe they
them.
would.
That's for them to
They
figure
could,
out.
that's perhaps, they could, depending upon the timing.
That's another area where I think we ought to look at incentives to help, to encourage them to do that or
For
something.
target industry, yes, sir. This is one the mayor was talking about.
You got a bad steak and shop house that wants to move there.
This is Business 121 and 35, southeast corner. This is the old Spanish Trails. Remember, they used to have a building just east of there, down there, and then one in the front. They had the swimming pool. It was a very old, two-story, drive-up motel that was built way before any code, any of the GDO, probably,
Before,
Rudy,
probably
uh,
Earth was born.
70s.
it was in the 70s. In the 70s. It's already happened, it's orange, 13 and 14, TxDOT owns that. They gave back the remainder to the owner. He was touched. He really came to us that wanted just to have a building permit, not deal with the drives, not deal with parking, not deal with fire lanes and this, that, and the other. And long story short,
It was
the
touched.
buildings have been demolished,
Certainly touched.
and it's, the site's been scraped and cleaned. Now, he still owns it, but
Eric,
again.
this is the one that he actually wanted to operate, correct?
Yes, ma'am. He actually wanted to come in and again, just get a building permit to scab up the sides and survive and not give us anything, just say, well, I'll just, we can just park wherever and, so we told him we wouldn't support that
Lovely.
type of logic. And he was
Yeah.
fully paid, so again, he scraped and cleaned and it sits, so he's there. Now, you'll see Waffle House. This is another area that they're gonna talk about, but again, you look at it, it's starting to make some sense. Waffle House, their lot moves up and down all the way here to there.
Yep.
But you can see what the take's gonna do to them.
Yep.
They're gonna lose this right here. They'll retain that. Whether they can survive, I don't know, I doubt it. This is gone. The gas station's gonna be gone. It's a full take, and that's one of the examples of full take. They're gonna keep it all for that corner. You can see what's going on up here. So you're gonna get an idea of an opportunity to gather those properties Mr. Petty's gonna talk about, Nick is gonna talk about. It's gonna bring about that opportunity. We're not doing
The
it.
chicken place is
State's
already
doing it.
planning on moving.
Yeah, it's already tied in.
Not Golden Chick.
The churches.
no.
Churches.
It's been I heard they had a place, but it was right there, they said.
Maybe
What the
part of
guy
the,
told me.
Part of that.
Probably
part
back in the
of-
motel.
We
going
talked
on.
to
That's what I'm wondering, if he's moving back to where that hotel thing is, moving back in there.
I did.
It's already built.
So, at this
Right,
point,
do it.
we were looking just as a
Get his name.
consensus, to proceed on drafting for your consideration an I-35 property impact ordinance for your consideration. If so, we can bring that back to you in March of 2015, or
Some
in March of
options
this
as you
year.
described earlier,
Yeah. Mayor,
related to minor impacts.
some of the things that Eric brought up, I didn't want to interrupt during the presentation, but I would like to talk to you in closed session.
Okay, and before we do that, can you go back to the 121 thing? And I hear you, but I just want to, do we have a shot of the other corner?
Go there.
22.
You can go back to
We
the
don't have
parcel, go back to the
like that.
parcel maps.
Yeah, we can pull it up.
I don't call it problem.
It's 22.
Yeah. That's what I'm looking at. Sorry. I was gonna see. I'm sorry, I should have said something when you were going earlier. We don't have to do it now.
No, he's there.
Now I know where you're going. Now I know where you're going.
Steve, do that, do your Zoom magic.
Zoom man. I can kind of see it from there. There's nothing really there.
It shows parking on here.
You can see that orange line right there. It's kind of one of, I guess that's the orange line, isn't it?
Paw it down the best you can, Steve.
21.
Now, what's right in there? All right, you can hold it right there. What, the red line, I'm looking at Huffines right now. See the red line that goes around Huffines there, and then you got the Pine Motel, there's an orange line.
Oh, you're south.
you're down
Oh, I thought you were on the outside.
No, no, I'm sorry.
Okay, paw it up.
There's no taking on the south.
Well, what's the difference between the red line and the orange line? See, you got the red line, and it kind of then it comes and goes around the barbecue place, or what, it's not a barbecue place anymore, it used to be. It's got that red line, but then you got an orange line on the upper edge. What's the difference in those two?
You're basically looking at this integration, it kind of comes in here but not there? Is that what you're asking?
No, come on down south, that line he's doing right now. See how there's an orange line that goes around that corner, around the Pine Motel? But then there's a red line that drops down there at Huff Fines. What is all that?
Property line.
I think that's just a property
It's
line.
property
It's just like all these red lines, it's the parcel lines.
Okay.
But
So
yes,
the
sir.
orange line is basically the take there on that corner, right?
I don't, there's no take there. It's, there's,
It's just a parcel,
be
right?
careful. From here back, at this point, there's no indication of take.
Well, the reason I'm asking, because that corner piece there, it's the state, right?
Yeah.
And I thought they were talking about wanting to get rid of that.
This,
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
They were, that owns, the state owns that all the way over to the corner.
I think what they were talking about was, my understanding years ago, was that they were gonna take this out, take this old road out.
Yeah, I think what,
But I thought we had contact
Right.
talks with them, and they said they'd be willing to
Go to
take us
area-
over
go to
that
area
entire
decap.
triangular piece.
let's go to Aero DCAD. Yes, Mayor, I think,
Day Labor Center, isn't it?
No, it was up in the road a little bit.
I think the illustration that we're showing you, Mayor, is something we made for graphics of the take. We can come down here and TxDOT already owns that corner like you're talking about.
Right.
The graphic you're looking at was done mainly for the sides, I think, when Steve, you gotta go south.
Going south, going
So we'll turn the parcels back on. They already own that corner, like you're talking about. The motel doesn't.
Right, and I guess what I'm saying is, I'd like for us to see about, because there was talk with them at one point, several years ago, that they were really just wanting to, now that they got this, they were wanting to see how the 35 deal was gonna affect it. But if it was still there after the 35 deal's completed, which according to that orange line shows it's still gonna be there,
Go in on
they
it.
were willing to get rid of it. They don't want to have to hassle with it.
Parcel
That they
out.
could deed it over to the city. And to me, I'd like to see us, you remember that?
Yeah.
And I'd like to see us pursue that. Because at some point in time, if we own that, at some point in time, we might be able to make a deal for that whole corner.
Yeah, certainly that's your focal point there.
You build a big enough monument sign,
How
nobody will
far
see the
back?
pines.
How far back does it go? That road splits it, is that right? And then that other green section towards the
This-
motel is state?
Go ahead, Steve.
I think the motel parking lot there, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I think that green space and then that little triangle space is.
That's got right of ways right there.
Right.
And then it comes all the way over to 121.
Yeah.
There's
That could
this,
be,
and over here and here.
Don, you've got that deal.
That's a big piece that I
Bill
think.
and 121, that could all be
Yes.
included in
Yes,
that.
it could.
Right.
Yes.
So I'd like for us
The
to pursue
realignment of Mill
that
Street.
with the state about, because I think if, once they've got that in place, that they know that's the way the road's gonna go, they're not being take, I think they would look at it and say, yeah, we'll give you that.
That state park we've talked about for a long time, in front of the 7-Eleven.
Exactly.
We have all of that improvement as a recommendation, part of the I-35 plan and Mill Street realignment.
Right.
So we really need to pursue that.
Right, I agree, I think we need to push forward on that, because I think it'd be a good time to do it, because everybody still think it's part of the highway expansion deal.
Yeah.
We'll follow up.
Lewisville, Texas, home of the world's largest screening wall.
Put a missile up there or something.
Change
It's
on
gonna
that.
go away. That's gone. Give it to me.
If we own that.
Well, if we build the wall and it falls over in a tornado.
We had that time hotel, probably sell it to somebody.
It's called a strategic tornado.
Front door.
I mean, executive. Yes.
No, we're
Once you put
not.
there,
Sorry.
right, there, it'd be a nice front door period.
Yeah.
That's what.
Liz, look over there.
Yeah.
Okay, so everybody anybody got any problems with moving forward with what they've presented and bringing it back in March?
It seems pretty comprehensive.
The only thing I'd heard, that kind of wanted to see changing maybe was on the minor
Options for
impact
the minor.
versus the major impact on the time frame.
We'll bring back options on that one.
Anything else? Anybody like to add to it or see tweaked?
I appreciate you giving me clarity on that 15%, where that was, to try and keep the,
Everybody need a break?
I can just.
Okay, let's take, is this a good stopping point?
Absolutely.
Okay, let's take about a 5-minute break here. Okay, let's get started back.
I'm sure I got
Thank
that.
you.
The next part of this, I'm sorry, go
Do you
ahead.
want to go in executive first, or do we?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, you want to do executive, we'll go ahead and, I think we could have done that, I forgot about it, I apologize.
I think, give us just a minute, are we going into closed? Let us turn the mics back on, please.
I'm sorry, I should have told you that when we were.
Okay, it's okay.
With vacant properties.
This day is kind of like a show and tell exercise. Most of what you've seen so far has been show with Eric, and a whole lot of what you're going to hear from me is going to be tell, because it does get so specific in terms of individual properties and individual impacts that we haven't gone into the detail that would really have to put us to the executive session. But generally, we want to talk about concepts and direction and actually be able to get some feedback from you on a couple of things. And these are non-council adopted goals and means. These are kind of the way I've sort of bookended this effort. What we're trying to do with this project is to create a new development curve that improves the value, the look, and the performance of properties along I-35. I look at all of this as kind of a big risk analysis exercise, because this process is really going to involve two parts. It's going to involve understanding what the quantitative risks are that will mean financial issues, they'll mean life and safety issues, they'll mean, construction issues, paving issues, a lot of what you've heard Eric talk about. But there's also another part of this risk analysis that's qualitative. And that qualitative risk analysis begins to get very subjective. And that's where, as we start talking about incentives and programs that are designed to accomplish this goal, those are going to have to be iterative by nature. We're going to have to be able to come back to you on a case-by-case basis and talk about those properties. Some of what I would have hoped and wished that I-35 would have done didn't do. Some of the places we needed right-of-way takings the most didn't occur. And that can't be addressed any more impactfully by when you just look at our Hotel Lake project. And you look at the impact of what could have occurred to accommodate some of the uses we'd like to see on the east side at the marina, for example, versus what's happening, and there's no impact at all there. So it's left us with some really difficult circumstances to try to combat when it comes to putting together an incentive package. And in some point in time, and we're seeing this, again, without being specific, there's a point where the qualitative impact can't overcome the quantitative impact, because the cost of going out there and doing those things we'd like to see simply exceeds what makes sense. It becomes penny wise and pound foolish. And that's where I think as a staff, I'm certainly going to want to be coming back to you often to be able to say, this is a subjective decision, but we want to be able to lay it out for you in an empirical sort of way where you can make the call. Is it going to be a qualitative? Is it going to be quantitative? And let's discover those balances somewhere, because they're going to be significant in some places. As we looked at this corridor, I went back and just did a little bit of a study on my own to see what the property values are as we start to look at some of these land uses. And it's fascinating when you begin looking at the range of values along this corridor. And you guys probably all remember several years ago, I think Nika put together this slide here that was the total combined revenue impact of the I-35 corridor. And at that time, this corridor was estimated to have a direct loss, if you will, of revenue for the city to somewhere to the tune of about $7 million. And I don't think that's an overestimated number. When you start looking at the number of businesses that are taken out and start multiplying the revenues and the ad valorem losses that come out with this, it's substantial. So we've got a little bit of a hurdle to have to overcome as we begin to back up this trail, as we're trying to create this value. We're doing it with less property, which means we're going to have to look very closely at use. We're going to have to begin focusing on uses that create a higher value than most of the uses that existed before. And that's where all these incentives are going to be coming into play. So just as a word of beginning, it really does create some huge opportunities and huge challenges to us. The means is to achieve land uses and zoning compatible with the I-35 corridor plan. And Liz has gone over what obviously are going to be some of the limitations, some of the risks that we're achieving, that we're going to have to face there. Part of this land use issue is really a circumstance where we don't have all of the tools today that we frankly need to be able to make this work. This overlay is absolutely critical. I mean, we absolutely have to do this overlay, because if we were to go out there today using the land uses that we have in place and try to apply those land uses to cover these gaps, we're going to find that the land uses are too generic to really be able to do it. And they don't give us the ability to apply the incentives strategically according to land use. And one of the things we want to be able to do is craft the incentives in a way that it's very, very specific to the uses that we want to achieve. If we don't do that, we've got these generic ideas about incentives, and we're applying it across land uses that have got huge variation in allowance, and we get into a situation where there's no way we can be fair about it. And so we do nothing, unfortunately, would be the result of that. So, you know, this iteration of process here, we've got to be able to get something short term to get us through these rough spots, which is what Eric has talked about with the ordinance. What Nick is going to be talking about is the overlay. And my point is, this is not a take one or the other. This is a you have to do both to be able to achieve what we're talking about, because it is so integrally involved with how we ultimately create the economic development incentives out there. We've got to have the tools to do it. So it's crucial that we take all of the steps that we're talking about and not just part of the steps. The challenge, obviously, is we've got a lot of acreage today that's already entitled with completely incompatible zoning and owned by users that purchase the property based on the expectation to develop in a manner consistent with the entitlement. Short way to say that is we got a whole lot of LI zone property out there. And the LI zone property is one of the areas that gives us some of the most concern. Because if I purchased a big piece of property with the intent of developing an LI, I'm going to have to be convinced that there's some really good reason for me not to go out there and develop that property as LI. And again, in some of those cases, the state didn't do us any favors, because they didn't take enough property to really go out there and justify that use to change to something else. So we are going to have to take the lead with those property owners and help them illustrate what that use needs to be versus what it is. The delta obviously is going to be the incentives. So Steve, just go for it. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these next couple of slides. But just looking at the northern portion, at the vacant area of land, I would say in terms of economic impact, there's probably no place in Lewisville that has more potential economic impact based on unentitled, vacant property than this area right here. And so we're spending a great deal of time on this. And if you'll remember back on our initial slides when we started this, a lot of this is intended to be the hotel, recreation, the uses that are not even remotely consistent with what's that property is entitled today. So, and I mentioned that I'd gone back and done some homework on values. It was kind of surprising to me to see the range of values that we have in Lewisville today. If I can find my stupid little sheet of paper here.
And that cross street running east to west there on the bottom portion of that is, no, the bottom portion.
407. Oh, down here.
Yeah, this is what?
That's the railroad.
Okay, okay. Just want to make sure.
Looking, if you look today, let's just say you're going to take an average value per foot of all of the existing properties, and I'm going to speak a little bit beyond this map because it's applicable to all three slides. Look at the entire general business. The value per foot on average today in a general business category out there is $5.17. That's the average value today. Now that spans all the way from $1, and I do mean $1 a foot, all the way up to $14 a foot. So there's a huge variation in value. Part of that tells you that because the uses are so broad and because the time frame that has elapsed over the beginning to end of this is so wide that we're going to have to be very specific in terms of how we go out there and impact new value. Because when you're going from $1 to $14 all within the same land use, that's a pretty broad spectrum to have to overcome. So you got to start putting tools in place to bring the ones up to closer to the 14s. In the industrial category, interesting, in this light industry category, that value is $4.55 a foot. So you really only have, less than $1 difference in overall value per foot between the light industry category and the general business category. I was not happy with that when I figured that out. I mean, that was not good news.
Not motivation.
That was not motivational, because it didn't create enough of a value gap to be able to make the argument that, but for your entitlement, you could really count on this much more. And the reason is because we have this huge spectrum of time that's elapsed over the time these properties developed. So again, we got to go out there and create conditions that push it toward the higher mark. Also within this area, you've got multifamily, and interestingly enough, the multifamily is valued at $5 a foot. So the multifamily piece of this thing is just slightly under the general business in terms of its value, but not that much more than the light industry value. In the light industry, we've got parcels today that are valued at $16 a foot. Existing parcels in the light industry category that are valued at $16 a foot. But when you look specifically at those parcels, they are not light industry uses. They're in light industry areas, but they're not light industry uses. One of them happens to be a restaurant. Another one happens to be an entertainment venue that has nothing to do with light industry. So it just points to the need to get a lot more specific in terms of how these DCAT. These were pulled right off the map.
Those are highest and best use deals.
That's right. That's exactly right. So when you look at that, again on the LI, we've got properties as low as $1.50. I think was my lowest one. Yeah, no, $1.40. I've got LIs, several LIs that are valued at $1.40 a foot. So again, we just got a huge variety of range within those values. As we start talking to property owners, and let's go on to the next one, Steve. Southern portion, we don't have anywhere near the vacant land inventory. Obviously, some of the more valuable land down here, and some of our focus, especially, I brought my little laser pointer, especially as we start looking at these parcels over here, there's some real opportunities. But what you don't see here is a map that we'll probably end up creating when Eric is finished, and that is taking all of these properties that have had takes that have eliminated the future use of the property but have left for significant remainders. They're going to end up being on this map because they're going to be vacant just by nature of the way TxDOT's going about acquiring these properties. So there's going to be some opportunities to consolidate properties to create uses that today would never occur. And that's something we got to be really sensitive to, because that's going to create some significant incentive opportunities for us. Not those where we have a backyard, that we got to figure out whether or not we're going to have to maintain it with park dollars or whether or not we're going to turn it over to the owners. But those where we've got commercial uses that by virtue of combining two, we do create an opportunity where today the two separate uses would never be able to fly. So there's some big opportunities, even though we don't see them necessarily on this map. There's going to be some vacant land opportunities I think we'll get a chance to do something with. Go ahead, Steve. This is the land uses. The one thing that strikes you immediately on this map is the yellow, which is residential. So as we start talking about the overlay, and Nika begins to look at what that overlay needs to look like, there's a lot of uses through there that we don't want, frankly. There's a lot that we'd like to see changed. There's some that we'd like to see, improved, altered over their current use. But one thing's not going to change, and that is the amount of developed single-family residential. So one of the questions that we get into as you look at the overall I-35 plan is there's a clear direction toward mixed use in that plan. When you read it, mixed use is a term that's probably used 100 times. I mean, it is throughout the corridor. So this is kind of where I want to ask a couple of questions, and I want to get just some general feedback from you in terms of perception and interpretation. Because as we start building this overlay district and we start crafting incentives toward the goal of mixed use. Mixed use means a lot of things to a lot of people. There's vertical mixed use, there's horizontal mixed use. Everybody's got their own impression. And unfortunately, the definition of mixed use is generally whatever you want to make it. There's a lot of different ways to apply it. One of the questions that I have for you guys is just not looking for consensus, but just feedback. is when we have vacant properties that will accommodate mixed use that are not zoned today. They're zoned light industrial, for example. And we're trying to put them into a mixed use category. And we're talking to owners. The first question that comes up, and it's already come up, is, well, what kind of multifamily would be allowed on that deal? Because no one separates multifamily from mixed use. They are interchangeable terms most of the time. Now, preference is you'd like to see, the vertical mixed uses where you have the resident on top and the retail on the bottom. And I'll tell you, from an economic standpoint, that's a non-starter in most places. The cost to build that product and lease that product does not justify the dollars that go into building it. And there's not very many hugely successful vertical mixed-use projects in the Metroplex, with the exception of those that are occurring in intensely urban areas. Even when you
get one over in Castle Hills, you remember.
Yeah.
And H will be that type of mixed use.
Yeah, well, and you look around the Metroplex at where mixed use has become successful and what the perceptions are that are attached to it. People see South Lake Town Center, for example, as a successful mixed-use product. What they forget is it's not a vertical mixed-use product at all. It's a horizontal mixed-use product. So as we start to craft in our mind what Lewisville looks like 40 years from now, based on the changes of use that are going to occur by virtue of our actions over the next 2 to 3 years, one of my questions is, what is your feeling about mixed use? What is your feeling about the use of multifamily within those areas as opposed to the retail? Are there expectations in your mind for what these uses really need to be? And do we at some point in time need to tap the brakes based on the use preference? Because the market is no problem right now. We could go out there and put multifamily till the cows come home based on the market. And we could put every stipulation in the world that you might want to put on a multifamily complex. We could, do developer agreements. We can attach hundreds and hundreds of pages of CCRs. But the bottom line is, as we start venturing down this road and look at these categories, what is mixed use in your mind? What are the kind of things that you expect to see in mixed use, and where would you advise us to begin tapping the brakes in terms of allowances under mixed use when it comes specifically to multifamily? When I say multifamily, I mean residential, okay? I'm condos, townhouses, whatever. You know what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about single family. I'm talking about essentially attached. I'm talking about multifamily, townhouse, duplex, all those apartments. And I just wanted, since we had a chance in a work session environment to have some discussion about this, I wanted to see if you had any feedback on it or any feelings about it. And this is the part where, now you tell. I told, now you tell.
Go ahead, Councilman.
I'm all for it, with the vertical part particularly. Although if South Lake Town Center type deal came in, nobody would turn it down.
Mm-hmm.
When you say you're all for what, Brady?
Mixed use, vertical, and I don't know anybody, I was out at Texas, whatever they call it now, the old Presbyterian Hospital in Flower Mound. And if you look behind it, there are thousands of apartments going in.
Yeah.
Which 5 years ago, 10 years ago, that wasn't gonna happen.
Right. No problem.
Yeah,
Only in
but it's,
Lewisville, in
there
my opinion.
all kinds of stuff going on out there.
And
And then you go down to Lakeside
elections here
and
shortly too.
$24.99, they've got the vertical mixed use and single-family homes in it.
Dude.
Now, they're the 25-foot wide and deep.
Zero
They're
lot line,
big lots, big houses.
When you say vertical mixed use, what are you saying? When you're saying vertical, you like at 24.99 out there at Lakeside, that's 3 or 4, maybe about 4-story, maybe.
4-story minimum,
three,
probably.
Maximum is what I see out there.
Well, yes, but I'd say 3 to 4 story minimum. Then you take into account the uptown Dallas, and some stuff in
but-
Plano.
Right, and that's what he was talking about. The only place that I've seen that successful, believe me, I'd love to have it, and I don't think the only place we can see it successful would be out there by the lake, but The only place I've seen it stuff was in the urban areas, right, like you say, uptown, McKinney area, you go over to Fort Worth, the 7th Street Montgomery area, that's very successful there, but those are highly dense populated areas. I don't think we're gonna achieve that here, except maybe in very limited areas, like maybe out by the lake where you get people.
TOD, the
I'm
transit-oriented
thinking, I'd
development.
love to see if we can't make it work in TODs.
Now, where you're talking about in Flower Mound, is that
But
a
that's
vertical
like
to mixed
Mockingbird
use, or
Station.
is it just
There's
vertical?
both.
That's my
Mainly
ideal of a TOD.
Or condos, but if you go over to Lakeside in 2499, it's got retail on the bottom and then multifamily above it. But one block over, or if they're fairly small blocks, they're single-family homes.
Yeah.
And then there's apartments right next to them and townhouses where they have basically row houses. But the single family might have 5 feet between the buildings.
Very small.
You know, and it's almost a shotgun house, but it's a lot of square footage.
Right, they used to develop out there, you're right, they used to develop nothing but big lots out there. Now they're going to the small lot because that's just what people are wanting. They don't want a big lot. But what you're seeing out there, and I don't know, you've seen places do it, but what I've seen driven around out there is it's got some proposed retail on the bottom, but I don't see anything being happening, a little bit of office here.
Agreed.
But then it only goes, I think, 2 stories above that for a residential.
Probably.
And I don't know how well, and we look in other places, you look in Plano's had some success, but not a huge success. They've really struggled. How many years did it take them to get that success? We went over and looked at it 10, 12 years ago, and it's still not completed yet.
Yeah.
And there's other places that have really struggled. Grapevine has struggled with that.
Grapevine, Colleyville, Northridge and Hills.
They're all struggling
Most of them do.
with that type of issue.
And I think Rudy's got a good point, and we need to use that as kind of a differentiation to the discussion, is because where there is enough area that the vertical mixed use can have immediate adjacent high-density residential, it's a different outcome than when you just have a 250 strip of vertical mixed use and potentially nothing behind it.
Right.
Because in those places in uptown, that becomes really the divider, is uptown and those places work. Because within, an acre, there's probably 24 to 40 units, all right? Well, if I'm looking at 5 to 6 units, or 6 to 10 units, which would be typical of a 3 or 4 story multifamily allowance in zoning, that's never gonna do it unless we have the ability to put pretty significant density of residential behind it. So as we start looking specifically, and this applies to the northern section, I mean, it really does, because as I've taken folks out to look at the retail potential of those tracks on the north side of 35, specifically on the west edge, everyone comes back with, well, this is never gonna be 800 to 1,000 foot of power center retail. It's just not the location for it. But if the city's willing to accommodate multifamily, we can probably accommodate some level of retail and maybe even vertical up front, as long as we have the ability to put the higher density, different kinds of residential behind it. So it's one of the things I wanted to kind of get some feedback from the
Well, when you're
council.
talking multifamily, are you talking about the typical multifamily that we've currently got? I'll exclude the Huff Hines community. Excluding that, are you talking about the typical multifamily that we have in Lewisville now?
No,
Okay.
I don't think so.
Okay.
My preference is no.
Okay. that's fine.
Because I believe, Mayor, that right now the market will support a different level of multifamily than what we have existing today in Lewisville. So the thought being, we can create a multifamily template with a whole different design criteria than what you have today in Lewisville, and still fit within the market. But the issue is still, it is multifamily, it's just a little nicer.
That's
It'd be large
my
apartments
concern when you
versus
posed that
vertical.
question to us, was, I'm all about mixed use, multifamily, I start to get a little bit apprehensive, because I don't want a whole bunch of the old style apartment complexes. So if there is a tool that we can put into place and set some parameters to where this is the type of multifamily, I'm all about it.
Good, good.
When you first asked the question, and I didn't get the word out, I didn't get in the discussion quick enough, I guess. when you first asked the question, the first thought that went through my mind was, this is, we're a little further out from the core of the Metroplex on these properties. If you haven't created some degree of balance between retail supply and retail demand, there's nothing to drive demand to go there.
That's
The
right.
demand has to be nearby, it has to be on premises, and so we've kind of segued into the discussion about not just stacking, but what might be behind it
Right.
that is not mixed use, but just dense, higher density.
That's right.
Which would create that balanced supply, demand environment that I don't see how otherwise retail would survive.
Yeah, well, you're exactly right. And so you begin to look at the expectations for proportionality of use on these vacant parcels. And it's not reasonable to assume that if I've got a 20-acre parcel, that I could put 60% of that in retail
Yeah.
and make it work on the north side of 35. It's just not gonna be a reasonable percentage to expect. Now, it's probably reasonable to say that we could get 10 to 15, maybe 20 on a good day. But what I didn't wanna do is, because as we embark with the assumption here that we're gonna create the overlay, and then we begin looking at specific implementation strategies that will require your policy approval over the next year or two. One of the things we've got to understand is going into this, as we use these broad terms like mixed use, some idea of what proportion you expect. There's going to be quality elements that get built in with this. One of the beauties of creating a new ordinance is that we build the quality expectations much more specifically than what had been built in the past. And that is absolutely the intent to do that. But if there is an expectation that from a proportionality side, I don't know if I can live with a higher density project on 20 acres that's, 40, 50%. I really wanted to see it only 10 to 15%. That's a huge game changer. And so I haven't had that discussion with you all about what those expectations are.
What percent are you talking about?
Well, I'm saying that what we probably should expect is going to be 20% to 25% maximum retail on most of those tracks.
And that seems more rational because again, the demand, they're not coming across the lake, they're not gonna come southward across the lake to shop there.
No.
That's a barrier.
Yep.
And they're not gonna be driving up from Carrollton.
Right.
And they're probably not even gonna be driving up from the southern part of Lewisville or even the central part of Lewisville. So the demand has to be essentially, it's like a cloistered
Yeah.
environment.
We're going to create the demand to some extent. I mean, there's some
That's
demand there, but we're
exactly
going to
what
have
you
to
have
go
to
out there
do.
and create it. And as we create that demand, we also start talking about, okay, what are the uses that we expect? And they're not the 150,000 square foot power center with the 2 anchors, They are.
Or the dry cleaner and the
That's
small
right.
restaurant.
They are the neighborhood commercial type retail uses. There's gonna be some commercial uses, some business office. I mean, some of those things it will support. But what it won't support is, the 60,000 square foot Kroger, or some of the things that, sometimes our mind's eye, that's what we see out there on that vacant property.
Well, Austin Ranch would be a good example, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's a very good example. And I think we see more and more of that beginning to pop up. The property owners are going to have to be convinced that where we're headed with this creates an immediate market opportunity. I think that's one of the points that we have to sort of confront, is that when we go to a property owner and say, well, 5 to 10 years from now, this property could be worth X, Y, or Z. They may say, yeah, you're probably right. But today, according to the market, it's worth $10, $11 a foot, and I'd just soon go ahead and sell it and use it in the existing entitled use and be down the road. We gotta have a compelling reason that they not do that. Because as we've talked about, there are certain limitations we have on how we go out there and retrofit that use to something we like if it's already entitled.
And it's that value that's the real kink in this anyway.
That's exactly right.
And I'm no expert in any of this. However, my thoughts are, I've been looking at some of these development. Farmers Branch has done a little one. Capel's Heritage Park.
Heritage Park, that's one, yeah.
That's a phenomenal
Yeah.
product
Yeah.
and can become a mixed use. You've got some density there.
They've got some space to build too.
And maybe there's a transition where you're doing these stacked 1900 style houses with a lot of character for single family, and then maybe there's an opportunity for some townhomes, much like we're doing behind, and get your mixed use that way without necessarily having to do the stacked apartment building that causes the, it's more of the same. This is, I mean, this is a product that you just don't even see.
That's a great product. I know it's exactly which one you're talking about, and it looks good.
Yeah.
And there's a great market for that. I mean, that market is very hot right now.
And you're talking millennial families. They're having kids later.
Yeah.
They're not having the time or the resources or the interest of caring for a quarter-acre lot.
Right.
But they want a nice house with nice amenities, though, with some character.
And they want immediate access to transportation.
Transportation, parks.
That's right.
Dry cleaner.
Those sustainable components are really, that's what's driving the market right now. And that's where the TOD discussion becomes sort of immediately pertinent, is where we can take advantage of DCTA's opportunities and where they want to go. And we've had a couple of meetings with them, and obviously they're very high on what could happen. They're not necessarily high on the financials to make it happen. But there's some opportunities. It's not, this is not Mockingbird Station. It's a different environment than Mockingbird Station. Mockingbird Station had some infrastructure and some density, some things that were right there that made that thing a lot more effective. And people don't realize there was a lot of turnover in retail users in Mockingbird Station the first several years.
Oh, yeah.
A lot. So,
But they were able to create something of a destination.
They did.
Mockingbird Station. I think you're gonna have a problem trying to make some of that a quote-unquote destination.
Yeah, and most of the market people that I've spoken to agree with that. The first thing they say is, well, so can we get support from the city on, tiered parking? And my answer is, if it's the right product, probably so. Because that becomes some of the things that if we put a tax increment finance district, for example, in place, and we start looking at what it takes to create that density to support that level of retail, we got to start thinking about those dollars not necessarily going into just the street or the utilities or the right-of-way. We got to start talking about how those dollars are going to be used to create vertical improvement. And those vertical improvements are going to be...
Get your parking meters.
Ready. With success, remember that.
I don't want to open up more, pick a name, Chapel Hills, whatever. I don't want to open up more of that. We have a huge amount of that in Lewisville. Would I be interested in something that's a higher density, more like what we're doing here behind Old Town? Maybe even a little higher than that? Yes. Would I be interested in something that gives me single-family homes and puts some townhome properties around the periphery or mixes those? That would be really interesting to me. Horizontal, I'm with you on the vertical. I think we have one, maybe two opportunities for that vertical to work. It's gonna be a lot of money and a lot of lifting.
Yeah.
One's here in Old Town, the other's probably down by Huffines. But
And we can get penny wise, pound foolish real quick on that product.
yeah,
I mean, we can make, it sounds good. When you look at it, it's very aesthetically pleasing. Unfortunately, from a quantitative standpoint, it falls way, way short.
yeah.
And we can achieve the same revenue. We can achieve the same results with the horizontal product that are achieved with the vertical product, and we can achieve it faster. So that, to me, that's one of the things that we've got to really begin talking about. Steve, go to the next one, if you don't mind, please, sir. So there's large property priorities that we have a plan to go and do, and we wanted to visit with you all about how we intend to do this, again, without being property specific. What we want to be able to do, especially on some of these large vacant properties, is begin initiating discussion with these owners. So far, the discussions we have had have been with the market, with people that are interested in purchasing these properties to see what we think that market potential might be. Now, when you start talking to the actual owners specifically about what can happen, we believe that there is still a way to increase an illustration in value on the I-35 plan based on the discussion that we just had. And it is literally prerequisite that we be able to go into that with that discussion about what that residential component looks like. It just has to be part of that discussion. And I wasn't about to go out there and start having those discussions until I had this discussion with you to make sure we're headed in the right direction. Our goal is that these properties initiate zone changes on their own. Now, the difference in what that's gonna look like is going to be, frankly, what incentives we're willing to put on the table, what our time expectations are, what our willingness to go out there and work with them to achieve that are going to be. Obviously, tax increment financing becomes an immediate opportunity that's frankly there's not too much risk. It's easy to do. We get some immediate, leverage with tax increment financing. There are probably, yes, sir.
Can you explain to me the difference between the TIF and the TERS?
There are no difference. It's
Okay, that's what I thought, I just want to make sure.
Yeah, the tax increment reinvestment zone is the
I just
technical
wanna make sure.
term under 311, and
Okay.
it is called a TIF.
Okay.
Yeah, no difference at all. There's also a possibility, when we start talking about these overlays, the economic incentive overlays, there is a possibility that we could have a piece of property that would, and this is probably gonna be a piece of property at least 25 to 50 acres in that range. This won't work less than 25 acres. But there are gonna be opportunities where we could put in place a TERS with a PID overlay as well. And the case where those are going to work are gonna be those places where we want to go out there and incentivize the level of residential that meets our expectations compliant with the corridor plan, where the TIF in and of itself is probably not gonna be enough revenue to generate the cost necessary. And that'll be particularly the case whenever we start talking about parking garages. Because if we really go out there and create the high quality density residential, the TIF is not going to be enough money to support helping go out there and put a parking garage in. And remember what that TIF increment's coming from. It's only coming from the increase in value, and if that increase in value is limited to a $250,000, $300,000 home, that's just not the increment we're gonna have to support a parking structure that's, $12,000, $16,000 a space to start, to get it built. So there's gonna have to be additional overlays that we consider in those circumstances.
My question to you is, so if you went the TIF and PID route, would you try to target more than one site to work with, or would you try to target one site and demonstrate what can be accomplished to try and use less incentives on other locations as they look at what was accomplished and say, I want that too?
I think it can be done simultaneously because the tool is not difficult to deploy. The education curve for the owners is going to take some time. And in some cases, this is only going to work if an owner is willing to sell their property to somebody that's a developer.
Right.
And the developers will understand this immediately, the sophisticated ones. And these can be done in tandem, one and another at the same time. I won't be surprised if we don't end up doing a first one up there on the north, just to show how well it works.
Well, and that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, an example wouldn't be out of the question.
A demo, demo site, so to speak, to prove the concept.
Yeah. The good news about the PID, and Lewisville knows more about PIDs than most places in the country because of what you've experienced in the past with Castle Hill. So
We know a lot.
to me, this is the perfect place to be able to deploy that sort of dual overlay strategy where we have the zoning in place by virtue of the I-35 corridor. We have the TIF in place to take care of the basic infrastructure needs, which is obviously a pay-as-you-go circumstance. I'm not talking about issuing TIF debt at all. I'm only talking about reimbursing public improvement expenses with the TIF increment. Then the PID overlay, frankly, becomes the piece where we go out there and incentivize the level of residential quality onto the qualitative side of the equation. That becomes the difference. And I think we can do it. I think we can do it quite effectively. And, the good news right now is the PID bond market is very, very good. We sold some bonds last week for 6.2 with very liberal calls on them. It's great financing. The market loves it right now. As long as we can go out there and show the value, we're in good shape. Greg, do you have a question?
So as far as the TIF and not selling any debt on the TIF, we would do the city, public sector would do the infrastructure and pay ourselves back?
They would do the infrastructure and we would pay them back with the increment.
Okay.
The goal being, and you'll hear this from me a billion times, I hate it when cities have to put any cash out. I'm cash averse because I don't like the city to be in a circumstance where we've had to put cash out. I'm much more inclined to go out there and make a deal where we have the confidence because we put the quality standards in place that the revenue will be there, but the private sector takes the initial capital risk, not us. And I think that's fine. I think we can make that case all day long. I don't think the TIF revenue bond is a particularly useful tool for us, because frankly, if I go out there and sell a TIF revenue bond, I'm paying 200 or 300 basis points on the fact that it's an enterprise note as opposed to a CO or a general obligation, and I'm never gonna let a TIF revenue bond issue fail, so it's kind of meaningless to go out there and spend the extra money to issue debt for a TIF revenue bond when I'm never gonna let it fail. I just go issue COs. And that's what I did in Grapevine, with the Grapevine Mills Mall product. It just, initially, well, that's a TIF revenue bond. Well, you could sell it at that, or you could save a couple hundred basis points and sell it as a CO, because you're never gonna let it fail. But that's why I don't like the city having to go out there and be the capital carrier for that initial tier of debt. I want the private sector to do that. Our incentive then is, if you do this, then we put the PID overlay on it. And now we've created that means to create, if there is a market gap, that maybe the market hadn't arrived at that point, or maybe there's a fear that it won't be successful initially, the PID becomes the gap, because that becomes immediately financeable money for the developer. That's the equity piece for the bank that sells the project, and it gets it over the top much, much quicker. And again, I think as we talk to these property owners, timing is gonna be crucial. I don't wanna go start talking to them and say, well, 3 to 5 years down the road, we got some potential. I wanna say, if you will consider rezoning this property today, we're prepared to do X, Y, and Z. And we think that the market will support this strategy, and we're prepared to do it with you over the next 3 to 5 months. And I think that's gonna be the difference. Because otherwise, we're in a situation where the last bullet point is always an option, but Liz has told me it's not a preferred option.
It's an option that's been brought up for every year that I've been on council, and we just kind of kick it down the road.
It could happen, but it should be, I'm only comfortable with that option if I know we've done everything to avoid it. And frankly, if we haven't gone out there and created the development template that makes sense, shown how the market dollars can happen for the developer, and then, worked with them to achieve the incentives that make it happen. If they still say no on all of that, then I will at least have known we tried everything.
Right, it seems much better to create the environment for them that makes it advantageous to them. They say, oh yeah, I can create a better income investment here, a return on my investment here by doing this, than leaving it as is.
Absolutely.
Instead of using those incentives to do that, instead of us having to go forced rezone, which takes.
And then save them $500,000 in legal fees, and us too, at the end of the day. Now, one piece of that becomes crucial in terms of this strategy that I really want to make sure that everybody's on board with is, you might look at this corridor plan and all this and you say, we really want to be aggressive about this, we want to make this happen, let's go out there and get this done. There may be a temptation to say, well, let's go ahead and put a TIF overlay on this to encourage it. In my opinion, we don't ever want to do that with a property that does not have the zoning in place to accommodate the use that we intend.
Right.
Because that becomes an incredibly important leverage point, and it becomes the delta between, do I make this deal with the city or do I not?
Right.
So we want to hold that as a tool, as opposed to looking aggressively at the opportunity and putting the overlay on it first. And this is just one opinion. But if we're going to be talking about how we go out there and make this happen fast, the financial side of it says we need every tool we can get and every leverage we can get to avoid that last bullet point.
Well, speaking to that, if I remember right, the two that we have in the city is, we have one over by Waters Ridge.
Correct.
We did that for the company, what was it, the tile and carpet company came in years ago.
What about Huflines?
No,
No.
are you talking about the pit, Mayor, or the tip?
Neither one, I thought it was a mud.
We have one in mud, that's right.
No, we have
The Vista Ridge area has a mud.
That's what I'm saying, the Vista Ridge area
We
had-
have 2 pits and 2 tips.
Yeah.
Right, and they, what the first one we did, if I don't remember,
There's a
I wasn't on
levy.
council then, but we created the tax deal
Mhm.
too.
Are you talking about the RUD and the drainage?
The road, I
the-
guess it
yeah.
was, road,
But those are
down there by the levee,
Right,
over
the
there
levee,
yes.
in Waters Ridge over there, and that company, we did it for that company that came in.
Brinkman.
Brainman, remember when we did that?
Yes.
Wasn't that the first one we
We
did?
have a PID that supports the levy.
Some of those were abatements that we did.
There
that.
is
Anyway,
actually.
okay, so what, over there, I thought we had,
Bid.
We have
we
a
just have a
PID.
PID and that's all. What about the home area down there by Vista Ridge?
That is
South
your,
Wall.
that's your lid.
That's an levy
That's a levy
improvement
improvement district.
That's the,
Yeah, that's not paid
Lid.
by the city.
Oh.
I mean, that's a separate entity.
okay.
You have levy improvement district.
Okay, so the point was, are there, and I understand that now, that's the lid that came, that's what I was thinking of.
Yes.
But can you incorporate those into the area to add your eating cities? I heard you saying use every tool you have to do it. Can you use it? They seems to have worked well down there. I know there's a little bit that flares up every now and then, but then when they see why it's there, it seems to go away a little
Well,
bit.
you, I mean,
You have
if
to
you look
justify the
at,
need.
from a purpose standpoint, if you say, okay, well, this might be an area we want to do a drainage utility district, for example, or something like that, certainly the tool's available to us. I don't think a levy improvement district would be, because I don't think that's a creation
not
of
gonna be a
us
need.
necessarily. But the answer is yes. It's just a different application specific to a need, and that would be in that case drainage.
That's what I was thinking,
Yeah.
was any type of drainage or utility that we needed to done, we could also.
I think the ones that are there now, we might want to model something off, but we wouldn't want to use those because we don't control them.
We don't control it.
Right,
They have their own
right.
separate board.
I understand what
Yeah,
you're saying.
that's why
what
I
was
think it's a
thinking.
different,
Yeah, you have a
different
lid,
board.
and you have a road improvement district too.
Yeah.
Most people pay 2 additional tax rates out there.
I don't want to get into any situations, frankly, where we're talking about anything that is not a district that's completely and wholly controlled by the city council.
Right.
If it doesn't meet that criteria, it's gonna go way down on the list from my standpoint, because the only way we can control where, when, and how
Right.
is if it's done here. So that's gonna be the first criteria that we apply to which district type that we use.
You have 2 TIFs now. You have the Old Town TIF, and we did that TIF up front. We came in and we did the overlay district, and we created the TIF on top of the
We
overlay.
expanded it, didn't we?
We later expanded the TIF, yes.
And that's one thing about a TIF, you can't expand it. You cannot do that to a pit.
And to me, from what you said earlier, that's what you would look at doing, because you don't want to go in any big overlay of TIF on an area that's not zoned where you want. So you got one little piece there that's willing to come in and zone what you're looking for.
Yep.
You put the TIF there, then if a neighboring
Tool.
piece comes in, then you can expand it too
Yep.
then.
Well, and that becomes our carrot. You wanna get in, this is what we need to do to make that.
Part of what I was saying earlier.
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of strategically, from my standpoint, how we need to approach these vacant properties. And what I was looking for today was sort of affirmation that that notion is consistent with where you want to head. And if it is, I think we're
What have
ready.
you seen from the developers, and we're talking about, when you look at the overall picture, that's a fairly narrow piece of
It is.
property. I mean, up and down that freeway there, that's a very narrow
Yeah.
piece. What are you seeing as far as what they're looking for, as far as, and we're not talking about the type of multifamily that we have now,
Mhm.
or we're talking about the more modern new multifamily where it's kind of a.
Ops.
Well, to me, it's a walkability, accessibility difference.
Right, but that combined with the
Place.
almost zero lot line housing, like we're talking about over here, what are they looking for?
They like it.
As far as percentage of what is what, are they looking for a mixture or?
The percentages that I gave you have come straight from them. I mean, they want to see something where they wouldn't be obligated to put in more than 25%, for example, retail with a development that's got residential potential. I mean, those numbers are really their numbers, not mine. And I think that what we want to be able to do is craft this in a way that it's kind of immediately market supported.
Those that we just did, and they're already got work and construction them over off of McGee Lane, where the old truck storage deal was, remember? We finally got rid of it for Eric.
They're detached certified.
Isn't that gonna be similar to a product like what they'd be wanting to put up?
It could be a combined, because that product is detached.
Right.
It's patio home completely detached. So I think in some of the larger areas, there could be that mix. It could be some
That's what I mean,
patio
yeah,
that's what I'm
detached,
saying.
some
That would be a
attached
part of their
units.
mixture.
That's right.
To have
That's right.
facilities
And they
like
love that
next to
idea.
it.
Yes.
But I mean, the development community loves that idea. They're not averse to the new level of apartment expectations, because that's what the market wants. People are willing to pay a whole lot more today for a quality apartment than they were 10 years ago. I mean, a lot of people just prefer it, quite frankly. And especially if
Some
I've
people
got.
have to because they don't have the credit to buy a home too.
That's right. And it's right in the days of, going out there with zero credit and buying a home, or maybe over, hopefully, but, we'll see. But yeah, I think their idea is we need a mixture of residential uses. We like the walkability, we like the sustainability, we love to be able to get to a train station. I mean, that's really a high selling point.
But how do you do that from the west side over to the east?
It's a task. We're gonna have to be able to rely on the overpass. Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, but there is a pedestrian connection on the overpass from Valley Ridge across to the DCT. Garden Ridge, I mean. Garden Ridge. We're gonna have to count on that.
You remember, during 2025, your committees talked about a pedestrian bridge connection.
Some of that DCTA can get involved on at other means of when the property is dense enough that they can like basically have a shuttling people from to the station. They could do that. There are a lot of
I'm even
opportunities
thinking
available.
further than that, I'm even thinking you have a little rail that goes from one side to the other.
Yeah, other means.
Well, they got access to money we don't have access to, so working with them makes sense.
So takes, almost like what the airport's got, but a much smaller scale. And you have a stop on one side, you get on, you ride over, and it drops you off right there, and you get out.
The TCTA may need to do that, because they're gonna be limited in the space.
They are, they've got no place to go.
You know, they can do a multi-story parking, but that's gonna be about it for what they got.
That's right, they don't have the space to do anything else.
So I hear
Because if you're gonna do a
residential
walk, you might as well
as a
just
bigger piece
carry a little
than,
car over.
is that because just retail in general is depressed?
No, retail's coming back. There's a lot of retail. Here's the stuff that we're not seeing in retail. We're not seeing the traditional 1.2 million square foot shopping mall. That product is not doing well.
Yeah.
There are new products that are emerging that are outlet type projects that are
More like
overcoming.
South Lake.
Yeah, well, and even, yeah, but even more specifically outlet dollars. I mean, there are outlet malls right now in the country that are producing up to 3 times more value per square foot than the traditional indoor mall. Now, there's exceptions, but when you look at the trends in retail, the walkable retail that has the ability to drive up and park in front of it and not walk into a racetrack to go in a mall, that market is good. I don't think, though, that where we are, and again, I'm kind of talking about the north side, I don't think that we need to focus on trying to recreate huge, large power centers up there, because I think in our minds, we've got Vista Ridge sitting down here.
Yeah, we peel off of that.
And we don't want to cannibalize what we have. We're going to have to do some things to make that more viable and improve that. And I see that as frankly, a circumstance where incentives are going to apply as well. But specifically, I think on the north side, we're talking about that less intense retail use that does allow for that walkable experience, where we're not having to worry about the infrastructure necessary to support 400,000 or 500,000 square feet.
But that also goes back to what I said about you've got a natural market boundary because of the lake.
Yeah.
You're not going to create a regional draw in that area. It's going to be, it's going to almost have to be a balanced supply and demand in that area, because it's too isolated.
It is, and we got to think about impact on neighboring uses. I mean, it almost makes sense to the extent that we do get, let's say, 15-20% retail on a project that fronts 35. In every case, behind that, there's residential, and all of it's single family. So we got to be able to transition this in a way that the residential uses don't become an impediment to the existing single family, and get them actually to buy off on it and support it, because that's going to be part of making certain that we get the zoning through. Is let's carefully transition that back into the single family uses. And frankly, I think it, from a market standpoint, works well. We just got to make sure our quality criteria are there. So I took 30 minutes more than I was supposed to.
I knew you would.
And I only had 4 stupid slides, so.
Mayor, we do have lunch.
Good point. Was everybody ready to go ahead and get started back?
Yeah, Mayor.
We eat while we work while we eat. Okay.
And I'm not going to be very long because Eric and Fred have already done a lot of
We
heavy
took all your
lifting.
time.
No, you've covered a lot of items and a lot of issues where we need to go. So this is going to be fairly short unless there are any questions. But I wanted to start with the last slide that Trent talked about, because the overlay district, the long-term strategy that we are going to talk about next, is really going to address and help these bullet items that we need to do. So it's going to have an impact, and when we talk to the property owners, to create a framework, so when we talk to them, they know exactly what we're talking about, and to prepare specific property opportunities as again, we're moving forward, and to support rezoning applications in compliance with the plan. But more important thing is that to not support zoning applications that are not in compliance with the plan. Because if we do that, that's going to derail the plan from the beginning. So that's extremely important.
Can you back up there? When you're talking about the contracts, what contracts are you talking about? Owner contract?
Contacts.
Oh, I'm sorry, I said contract.
No.
I beg your pardon.
Contracts, no.
Yeah, I think what the last thing you said though is probably very bullet point would be how important it is not to support somebody that's not participating in the program. Is that kind of?
Yes, participate in the program, and again, I think lack of compliance, because we know the uses that are currently on the corridor. We have done a lot of financial analysis since 2007, 2005, when we knew that the corridor is going to go under reconstruction. And we keep updating those financial numbers to say what's on the corridor, what could go away, and what's the impact on the city. And we have,
almost all of that is going to be new business.
that's what we're hoping, and that's what we need to encourage, because the existing land use and existing uses are very underutilized. The value that you have is truly, other than some sales tax generating businesses, the other one, the value that you have is in the land. The value is not in the building. So even if the building goes away, we're not losing that much value. So the more important things is that as new applications come in, as some of these property owners want to do something with their property, it's not to proliferate what we already have on the corridor. It's just to go beyond what our plan actually recommends.
I think a perfect example is, again, the piece there on McGee Lane that we did, that Eric would tell you, and I'm sure Don and everybody will tell you, that has been a nightmare for several years to the residents, to staff, to everything else. And once we were finally able to get that rezoned and make that a different project, well, it's just the residents are all happy, and everything's just going much smoother. It's going to, of course, create more revenue for the city too.
Exactly, and that's, again, going back to what Trent said, is creating that new market demand. So having new residential, restocking our residential inventory, because we know our existing inventory is older, so restocking that, bringing new, different types of residential, it not only creates demand for our retail and other businesses, it also increases our tax value up.
Right.
Because everything that we're bringing in right now, and we've been looking at that, is in excess of $250 and up. And it's very interesting, these are the small homes on small lots, but their value is one of the highest values we've ever seen in Lewisville. So
A perfect example is over here in Old Town. I mean, who would ever thought you could get those prices over here? They're selling them.
They're selling, and then, because I had a meeting with them, and they are pre-selling them, first of all. So there are people lining up to buy them.
Right.
And then their value keeps going up. They feel like by the second phase of the project, those are gonna be sold at $245 to $255.
Is that right?
Yes. So that's amazing. So, but this is a good market that you have created with Old Town.
Right.
That is, so you have created a market demand in Old Town for those residents. And by doing the plaza, by doing the improvements to Main Street and Mill Street, by putting the art center in place. So, and those were all kind of the front end to what you're getting now at the back end, which is the private investment, which is primarily what we need to be doing, or the same process that we're going through with the I-35 corridor. So we have had experience in this. You have had a very successful experience with Old Town. When that, we were doing some TIF analysis, and that value when it was created was $69 million. The current value in Old Town TIF is over $247 million. So that's a huge increase.
I can't tell you.
In 10 years.
Right, over a 10-year period. And I can't tell you the kudos to everyone here is that it seems like I'll just say in the Tri-City area, Lewisville, High Village, Fireman, everywhere I go, people are just saying, boy, it's amazing what y'all done there in Old Town. You're doing that the right way, you're not rushing it, you're letting it all evolve. Well, that is just amazing what's happening over there. People are very,
And your public dollar investments have really paid. They're
Right.
paying off right now. So that goes to, again, creating that market demand, putting some public improvements in place to leverage that private improvements. And we're not the only ones that are doing that. A lot of cities nationwide are looking at that because everywhere in America, when you drive through, you see that pattern of strip development, and now city leaders, urban planners, people that are actually using the places, new generation wants a different type of development. So all across the nation, everybody's actually looking at reinventing the strip. And large organizations like the Urban Land Institute are getting involved. And these are the top 10 principles that they ask us, to look at every time we're looking at like an overlay district or trying to reinvent that strip into something more that has a sense of place. And of course, the first one is ignite the leadership and nurture partnership. We've got to do that, which is, the last thing that Trent was talking about. Anticipate evolution, that this is not going to be something that's, going to be static. It's going to change, so we need to keep an open mind. So every time we're talking to a property owner, we need to keep an open mind and look at the market demand and to see what is the best that we can get out of that market demand, which is know the market. We cannot force the market. What we need to do is just to get the best that we can out of our market. And we will be looking at all of these items as we are going through the overlay district generation. One of the main things, and I think General brought that up, is the existing retail, and what Trent was talking about, the vast difference between value of like our general business and light industrial is because our zoning is cumulative. So we basically allow pretty much everything we allow in our local commercial, in our light industrial plus more. So those are some things we need to look at as we are revising our overlay
a
corridors.
good example of that is, and I think this falls into this, Eric talked with me about several years ago, is 407 in, not McGee's, just west of there. It used to be, it's a little strip shopping center, and on the corner there was a little thing there, and now it's a big used car lot, gas station. Was it a gas station before?
Convenience store.
Convenience store. Now it's a used car lot with a automotive center in the back. And but it's allowed in our zoning the way it is now, but it's not what we wanted to be there. But you couldn't create
Right.
it.
And now you can, right now you can control a little of that with your specific use or special use permit process, but it's still not the same where this process is going to really provide a lot more flexibility to us as staff and to you as council for some of those uses. But pulling back your existing retail land, because a lot of us are over retail. Actually, when we look at our analysis that we brought in, Lewisville and Plano are one of the two cities that are basically have a lot more strip shopping centers per capita. So pruning back some of that retail to make it more intensive, bringing some of the new uses and make the existing retail that's very viable to grow more. So basically, again, concentrating on the mall area, but pruning back some of the strip shopping center could be an avenue. Of course, we need to tame the traffic, make sure that it moves through, but the pedestrian oriented, more walking, more avenues for DCTA. Diversify the character, and of course, this is one of my favorites, and this group knows, eradicate the ugliness. that's something that I work hard to do at any job that I am, and then put the money and regulations where the policy is. So we need to create that policy and move forward with that.
There's an interesting article that Vika sent me that the Land Urban Institute had, and I will forward that to you, so it's a very...
Which is tied to those 10 principles.
Good information.
Good bedtime reading, puts you to sleep. So direction, which is what you're providing for us today, and leadership, which you're basically giving us in terms of creating that overlay to let everybody know that this is a desire from the city leaders to create that character and to have I-35 as something that's going to not only provide value, because our intent is to have that financial viability and new uses on I-35, but also change the character of the city and who we are and what we're trying to project ourselves out there. Because as I have said many times, people identify Lewisville with I-35. So it definitely has a dual goal that's going to benefit us. And the funding, of course, is very important, and all the mechanism in place that we take advantage of for public-private partnerships and implementing the plan. So the purpose of the overlay district, and again, because you've had this experience with Old Town, we're not going to go through it, just very briefly. One of the main things is to address the limitations of our current zoning ordinance, because our current zoning ordinance has limitations based on, the example you just brought up, Mayor. And we will be looking at our zoning ordinance down the road, but at this time, this is so critical to implement something on I-35 because we're under so much pressure for development. And to propose changes to new regulatory methods that we have, that encourage market-driven uses but strive for creating special places. This is a nodal development that we want to strive for. So we create a sense of place. And to implement the vision that was created by the I-35 plan and adopted by the council. So we have an adopted plan that we need to move forward. Our focus for funding and again for incentives, which Drew talked about, should be on mixed use and transit-oriented developments and destination retail entertainment venues and shopping center redevelopment. So if we attract new uses and if we do those three things, the character of the whole area is going to change, and again the tax base in the corridor is going to increase. So what are the components of an overlay district? It basically creates a specific boundary for the district, and even though it could be linear, as you talked about, it could be narrow, at areas where we have opportunities, we can, and especially those focal points, we need to bubble it out basically. So it encompasses a lot more properties, not just the ones that are right on the freeway, but even beyond the freeway, that it could be impacted, and we could combine those parcels and create something a lot meaningful. So that's what we'll do as part of the overlay district. We look at parcel by parcel analysis, not just along the corridor, but also beyond the corridor to see how we can make those impacts. The main part of an overlay district is to create a design guideline, a set of guidelines and set of standards that everybody has to comply with to, again, create that character. And look at which is, again, I want to use the Old Town example. So a plan was created. It has a set of land uses that's recommended by the plan, which is our two mixed-use districts that we created within the zoning ordinance. But we haven't rezoned, the zoning to those two categories are very voluntary. But in the meantime, we could, like this special use permit that we put in place, modify the existing regulations to actually impact the existing zoning. So that's something else that we can also look at as part of the corridor overlay district. The district can be a single district, or it could be multiple districts based on the character of the area and what we want to create. And within that rules, again, very similar to Old Town, we could specify administrative rules and oversights. For instance, you created the Old Town Design Review Committee for Old Town that looks at a lot of stuff. And you can see the success that committee has had, or the process that it's had, where they could really dive into details, work with the property owners, and create something much better as the projects come. So that could also be part of the district creation.
Can I interrupt for a second?
Absolutely.
We've talked about a very distinct and different character in three different areas. Why wouldn't you want to have, why would you want to have just one overlay district, or would you want to create, and I know it's more work, but why wouldn't you want to create something that is more finely tuned?
You would want to.
For
actually,
each.
right?
Okay.
You would want to. And we are addressing that. Actually, we are working with Parsons Brinckerhoff that did our I-35 plan. And because they have so much knowledge, they did not only of course the plan, but they also did the identity plan. So we're working with them to see what kind of proposal we can get on the table that uses their knowledge of what they've already done, and we leverage that, and so we get a really good proposal in terms of cost. And one of the options they're giving us is you create a master overlay. Those are the basic requirements that apply throughout.
Right.
And then you create the special districts where they would have, especially the ones that are going to be larger, definitely that are focal points, then they would have more fine-tuned. That's a
Is that where your
perfect way
form
of
space
putting
would
it.
kick in?
That's where your form base would kick in, exactly. So they have given us those options that we're looking at. Actually, Donna, Eric, Trent, and I are looking at that proposal to see how we could do that, and we're hoping to bring that to you fairly quickly after, if that's the direction we want to go.
Okay.
And then one of the main things that the proposal that we're looking at, and also we want to make sure that it does that, is when you create an overlay district, when you create a special regulatory method for an area where our staff is not used to doing that in terms of regulations, enforcement, making sure projects that are coming, they're reviewing it right. A big part of it is to train our staff. To see issues, to make sure that, you know, we are really, the review process and the enforcement process are going hand in hand. So that's going to be part of that. These are, you know, of course, you know, we want to, again, create places that you see on the right side, encourage people to walk, encourage people to engage in these developments. And so it's the site planning, architecture, building materials, landscaping, lighting, all of that is going to be part of the standards that we'll be putting in place as part of the overlay district. So the phase one, and we wanted to give an example just because we are not, so this would be the phase one, which is immediate, it's needed, it's going to be done fairly quickly, within 6 to 8 months after we let the contract with the consultant. We're not the only ones that are looking at this. Everyone who's had the same circumstance, or they've seen a highway widening coming through, they see this huge opportunity, because you're not going to get that probably 75 to 100 years before you get that opportunity again. So 183 in Irving is one example, and I wanted to show you this because, so just like us, they adopted a plan and they went into their ordinance, basically, they created the standards for the overlay district. And as you can see, they've got some areas, you know, up on the that far end, that's a much larger area. And this is how our focal points are going to be. So it's parcel by parcel analysis, and what do we need to include to get the highest value out of this particular problem.
And now it's all getting shook apart by earthquakes.
Maybe that's their strategy.
It could be.
Yeah.
Could be.
For the
Shake it up.
development.
It's our strategy.
So we'll have, you know, so we'll have a lot of graphics in there to show exactly when property owners come in. Again, this goes back to, they want to know the rule of the game. And so the more clear we are and the more we clearly define it in the ordinances, the easier it is to implement. So we'll have a lot of graphics to show them exactly what we're looking at. So this is, I think, it's brought up many, many times between your standard Walmart and when you have design standards applied, what can you get? So even without zoning, without rezoning anything, with the uses that we already have in place, the zoning we have in place, we can still improve that corridor. Now with everything that Trent is talking about, we go way beyond that. But just by applying certain standards, you can just have a different character and a different development and a much higher value. Because when they put more money into their initial development, then that value is up and that value stays higher.
So here's my big number one question. That's not our corporate image. Our corporate design image is this. Well, we just had it. 3 weeks ago.
I've had that when I was at up in Keller, because when I was at that's the number one complaint we got from the franchisees. I will provide, I don't know, as many examples as you want, that they do have the ability to change.
Right.
And to adapt to the city's regulations. So it's just that we need to be a little more vigilant. And the thing is that when we have already a for instance, in Old Town, we get that, but because you have created that oversight, you've created that district, it's a lot more difficult to deviate from those requirements than it is when you have general rules in place. So this is specific, and
Yeah. So does this help protect us from the conversations
Yes.
with
it does.
Liz?
It does.
Okay.
We still, of course, want to work with them.
Sure.
Remember Saltgrass and I've created the map.
I didn't say that.
Right. I know. I'll say that. No, we have it. a lot of, a lot of our uses that are existing, and we want to make sure that when they relocate back in Lewisville. We always have that back and forth discussion.
Well, what I was worried about is, from the conversation we had in the past, we have precedent to go this way.
Right.
Will this help us eliminate some of that precedent?
Yes.
Well, what you see is once you create that, we may not ever get as far as downtown Breckenridge, Colorado, but you will not see a McDonald's that looks conventional McDonald's in downtown Breckenridge. They've got the place. If they want to go there, then their design setters, they know they've got to fit into that
It's like
established.
McDonald's in Sedona. It's a turquoise arch.
Yes, and we may not get that far, but these are steps to get us
To
more
new
close to there.
New standards.
Yeah, TJ's got a very good point, and I would encourage council as you go forward, especially with this I-35 corridor. You can, staff can design, and you can tell them design all these overlays and all these plan developments and stuff, but yet if you continue to deviate from them and support the facilities that don't want to adhere to the plan and give them the variances and give them the options, you're not going to achieve that. And a good example, and council has the ability to do that. And I think she mentioned that in the first part of her deal, was that you've got to have your leadership willing to support the ideas that they're developing, because we're asking them to develop these ideas, but you've got to support them as you go along. A good example I remember is Sonic came in and wanted to put their sign on top because that was their new corporate image. Yet they built one right down here on 407 in Highland Village that didn't have it. They built one over here that didn't have it. They're always going to come up with that deal. It's up to you as a council to determine whether or not you're going to support this and stand fast, or give in and let them do it. And the reason I say this is because we're not in an area that has a lot more growth left. We're getting where our growth is narrowing and narrowing and narrowing. And so, especially the I-35 corridor, which we're talking about today, is this not an opportunity to probably come by for another 50 years. And so if you really want to develop this and make a big deal, I think you're going to have to stand pat and support it. I'm not saying you can't make an exception here and there, but basically you're going to have to stand pat if you want to create that corridor that what we're telling them we're looking for.
I think the other thing we often lose sight of too is that sometimes I feel like we behave as though we're desperate to have a given retail business here and forget that the retailers have probably put 2 years of research into identifying a location and a lot of commitment into where they've decided they're going to expand to next. And that once we've been identified on their radar, they want us at least as much as we want them, and maybe more. And we need to me, we need to get away from that sense of desperation that we gotta have this retailer, we gotta have that retailer, or, I don't know, the land's gonna sit there and nothing's gonna happen. Somebody's gonna wanna come here. But by the time they've shown that interest, they've already invested deeply into where they want to be and why they want to be there, and asking them to make some changes to suit our neighborhood is no different than a Breckenridge. If they want to be in Breckenridge, then this is what you do. If you want to be in Lewisville, then this is what you do.
So I'm gonna move to Flower Mound or Plano or Coppell. That's what you got.
Perhaps.
We play that game every time something comes up.
But that's the story that people tell.
No, that's what happens.
It may or may not. It depends on whether, if they identify a value in a market here that's not, either not in Plano or in conflict with other locations that they're gonna cannibalize, or too close to other competitors they don't wanna be by. No, they're not going there. This is what works.
If there's, the way you're saying it, they're gonna do what they're gonna do anyway, right?
They are.
Okay, so then we don't need to do anything. We don't need to have water and sewer lines. They will take care of that.
I didn't
But
say
it's the
that.
same type of deal. If you say they're gonna come anyway, we don't need to do anything. It's the same arguments we had years ago on abatements. Someone would come in, and did they have to have the abatements to get there? No, they didn't have to have, they were gonna go where they were gonna go. The question is, you've got a 30-mile radius to go into, and they're gonna go into that somewhere. And sometimes it's gonna be what the best abatement was. The other time, it's gonna be how close it is to where the president of the company is gonna live. And that happens a bunch too. So,
But the formula you just gave is more applicable to corporate relocations than it is to individual. It's more, that's not Sonic. It's not the Sonic plan. That's not the McDonald's
the Sonic
plan.
deal doesn't come up very often on those deals. It's usually a bigger deal, and we're in redevelopment in a lot of cases, not new stuff. And the redevelopment does change the thing, because you end up with a dead shopping center, or an underutilized shopping center, or in the case of what was called at one time the Huffons Plaza, that people didn't like what they saw. The same tenant mix is primarily still there. The shopping center looks better. And we did do that. Did that cause them, would they have gone away otherwise? No. They would have still had generally the same mix of tenants. But we wanted to spruce it up a little bit. And that's what they did. And luckily, the owner was willing to go along with it. Because there's a lot of owners that would go, if I'm 100% full and I'm getting the maximum amount of rent I can get, why do I want to spend any money?
I won't argue with that.
Yeah.
And yet, really what I'm saying though is with this I-35 corridor thing, especially what we showed today, what Trent showed today, it's undeveloped property, it's new, it's not redeveloped.
Yes.
It's new stuff, and as Nika pointed out earlier, she said the legal term was what?
Investment-backed expectations.
Investment what?
Backed
Investment-backed
expectations.
expectation. And to create that, I think you're gonna need to adhere to that design, to that development, to get the people willing to commit to that, because they know they're gonna have that corridor there that looks that way.
I agree with that.
That's what I'm saying.
I agree.
Okay.
That's not an issue.
Okay.
Because if we put something in place and everybody is adhering to it, then the others will too, because the only reason they want to be there is because they have an economic
And
advantage
that's how
to
it
do it.
balloons. You're right, and that's how it balloons. You're right. Okay, that's why.
But you have to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And you can't put something in place that is so restrictive that nobody would ever start it. That's where I'm getting at on it.
Okay. And I won't argue with that. I never advocated
Yeah,
that.
but when you're starting and there's nothing there to begin with, you gotta be real careful. Because you can't start it, at some point, people will just go, well, I'll just move over here and not have to worry about that. If I'm gonna be selling dresses or whatever, that I can sell dresses over here, I'm not gonna get that much more. Now, when you have something like everybody's adhered to a certain design pattern, and you have energy to go in there, and people want to go there, then you've got a deal where you can demand that. And that's what we're all hoping for.
But it's also, when you say, no, I won't go here, I'll go over there, the decision revolves fundamentally around what's the market, how's the market gonna support me here, how's it gonna support me there? They're not just gonna go, well, I don't wanna do your facade, because I don't wanna do your facade.
It's gonna be a
I'll go to
cost.
Plano if the perception from the research they've spent 2 years doing says, Plano's not my market. My market is Lewisville, or my market opportunity is Lewisville. I've already exhausted Plano.
They would
So
probably, in that case, go ahead and do whatever you want them to do.
And that's my point.
I don't disagree with it on that deal, but if people can move, they are
I get
flexible
that.
in some cases.
That in some cases, but in many cases, retail, by the time they've said, I want to come to your city, they've done a lot of homework and figured out, I've got a market here. That market isn't just instantly transplantable on an arbitrary, well, if you're going to not be nice to me, I'll just go build in Flower Mound. No, it's gonna be, is there a market in Flower Mound that
Yeah.
supersedes the one in
Well,
Lewisville?
the other, going back to the abatements, what then? All these people come in, they want abatements, and Lewisville has a historical deal on people that got abatements. After the first couple of years, they quit doing it,
Yeah.
because it's too much trouble to deal with.
Well,
But it made
and you may not
sense to their
have to do
investment.
them.
Yeah, but what it was a lot of paperwork.
Right.
And the 2 or 3 people changed that did that, and the president of the company said, it doesn't make that big a difference.
Right, the value's
And
not
it
that
didn't make
much.
any difference up front. It just looked good to the investors. Say, look, I'm saving money by going here.
The developer was getting, or the
Broker.
broker was getting a big pound on his tip.
Yeah.
And what we are trying to create here, I think, is for both of you, what you're seeing, agreeing on the same things. We're trying to create a corridor that will want to encourage people to come here because they will see their investment-backed return, not prohibit them from coming here because we got too stringent deal. I think we're trying to hit that medium there that will want to encourage the higher end development.
And they'll want to do that kind of addition to, additional improvement or upgrade to the facade because they see the return on investment.
Right.
And the way we're going to craft the ordinance is to actually look at both sides, to look at, because, definitely we don't want to kill business along this corridor. So we would want to craft it in a way that, again, and a lot of cities that I'm very familiar with, that Rudy knows, you always just have the stick. So that's why we're trying to come up with, we're going to have both. We're going to, create incentives. We're going to have options for them. So that's what this overlay district will craft.
And I really liked your deal where you showed a while ago about having a lot of images, because those speak so much more than the words you put down there in the ordinance, how they did. You have to do this. Well, that can be construed. One person reads it and sees something than another person. But if you give them the photo image, that puts it out in front of them. This is kind of what we're expecting.
Has that helped with the Old Town Design Review because we went to all the graphics?
Absolutely.
I love that.
It also helped with the signage ordinance.
Yes, that's really helpful, because they can see, because a lot of times you come and, especially the layperson, you talk to them and they're not in this business. In Old Towns especially, it's helped because they're a small business, they just want to run their business. So, but when they look at it, they say, oh, okay, that's what you're talking about, I get it now. So we definitely want to create an ordinance that would be very talking to the people, to the layperson that's not going to be involved with development. Now, of course, as Trent said, the big developers, to be honest, they're a lot easier to talk to because they've done this before, they do it nationwide, they understand the process. So yes, that would definitely be the task and the goal to do. But then the phase 2, which is we're going to focus more on going after these developers and these developments to come in, because you can put all kinds of overlay districts, regulations in place, but if the market is not there and if you're not creating that market, it's not going to happen. So the phase 2, we're going to basically primarily focus on the 3 focal points areas. A very similar process that we did with the lake plan. Now you might think that wasn't successful, but it actually was, because it brought a lot of interested people to Lewisville. Knowing what Lewisville is, they would want to create if some hurdles are taken away, basically. So you have to have that in order for trend to move forward, to say, talk to these developers, have all of this information in your back pocket to have that conversation and start that conversation. So the next piece would be to assess the market values for these special nodes, and look at all of our land use zoning codes to see how we can achieve the development, any legal encumbrances that are out there that we can take a look at. So we need to pave the way for some of these developments to happen. And that's what phase 2 would do. And then the developer's readiness is very important. So if a land is owned right now by someone that's sitting on the land, it's for us to go out there and find a developer that would basically purchase the land and go with the plan that we want to go. So developer readiness and pursue developers who become partners is going to be a major part of the phase 2 of this plan. So, and of course, as part of that, we're going to look at funding sources, which are very important. This is, some of the items that we have already identified in the plan. Some of them we need to move forward sooner than later, with Proposition 1 coming up funding. There's some opportunities for us to put some of these projects on the map and start talking with TxDOT, because a lot of these are TxDOT related projects. Identify the public cost for priority projects to see where we're getting that money. That could come part of that TIF strategy that we talked about, or the PID. And then look at this best funding strategy to see what's available to us and which direction we need to go for each node development.
If everybody's lining up now to get to the Prop 1 funding, and again, I want to state that phase 1 of 35E from LBJ to 380 could not be paid with all the money that's in Fund 1. So it's a lot of money, but it's not much to deal with. So you've got 254 counties that are jumping in to get to the money. So if y'all have something, please get with staff and maybe we can get something going.
Right.
We need shovel-ready projects.
Yes.
Yeah, they gotta be ready. Planning 20 years down the road isn't gonna work.
Right. And so like we've identified some of the areas that we really need to start focusing on, and one of them is that 121 Mill Street area that we really need to jump on, and because it's going to do so much. One is that's a terrible intersection.
Yes.
Two, we can make some improvement in terms of aesthetics. That's our gateway to Old Town. That's the gateway to the hospital area. So that's probably number one that we need to start design pretty much fairly soon to see what we can do. Then the next one that we've identified, and that's very important as part of the southern node development, connecting the mall to the other side, the CTA station, creating another overpass, on the highway. That's a long-term project, but we need to start talking about it right now, because as you guys know, it takes 10, 15 years for something to happen. But if you don't start talking about it, and if we don't start engaging TxDOT and all the other public entities, it's not gonna happen. So those are some of the things that we're going to identify, and we're going to start working on those as part of phase 2. So this is an illustrative we had on within the I-35 ordinance, which is basically connecting the mall, mixed use, and transit together. That little bridge you see over the canal, which is under construction right now. But we need to connect, if we can. That would just change that whole area, that node between the mall and the Hebron 121 station. If we could get another connection between 121 and Hebron on I-35.
With the configuration of I-35, the improved I-35, and I'll say Hebron and 121 bypass, is there any way to do a pedestrian crossing there now?
I think pedestrian crossing, definitely. We were looking for more than I mean, right now.
With the configuration that's being proposed to us now, is there any way to do a pedestrian crossing either under bridges, across, or something like that now?
Well, I think it would be a little difficult,
Difficult's okay.
What?
Difficult's okay.
Yeah, well, what you've got going on there right now is a lot of elevated structures.
And so I'm wondering if there's a way you can go under those.
Well, the elevation of the main lanes is basically going to stay where they're at, pretty
Right.
close. And then you've got a lot of elevated structures because of the direct connects to the Sam Rayburn Tollway. So, it's kind of like threading the needle. You just have to figure out if there's a way to.
What about that area, and just when you said that, made me think, it's actually right down there, I'll say just south of the Mexican restaurant you showed us. Oh, no. On the border. There is a bridge right there that goes over a low water, kind of a drainage deal. It's all grown up and everything. Could that area not possibly be made into, because the bridge is already there. Could that not be made into a crossover from east to west?
You're talking about right in front of the car dealership?
No, it's right in front of, it's just at the south end it's right there where that.
Main event and.
No, where, well, you could do there too. I didn't think that made it, but I'm talking about where the sushi place and now it's changed.
Wild Ginger.
Right here.
Wild Ginger, yeah. There's an underpass that go, we had a homeless sleeping under there for a while. Remember that, Steve? We had a problem with some guy sleeping under there?
You're talking about this area maybe,
Yeah, I think that's right there.
main event,
No, I'm thinking up by,
Leaf Bridge.
Right here, it's a gap right here, there's a bridge here. That's all it is.
yeah, there's a low mill bridge. My thing is, because there's a culvert right there, I guarantee there's a culvert just right, I think it's right there where that deal is, right
Yeah.
there. Could that not be made into a pedestrian crossing? It's already there. I mean, all we have to do is go in, clean that thing up, and I'm almost sure it's poured concrete on both sides. You might have to come in at the bottom and pour a walkway, but I think on both sides, it's poured concrete for the support of the freeway.
David?
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, you could do some sort of pedestrian. I'm not sure what the deck height is there, but, I mean, I'm sure you could put some sort of pedestrian.
Oh, I think I want to say it's 8, 10 feet there. Anywhere, somewhere across there where we could go ahead and connect it. It might not be ideal, but instead of waiting 8, 10, 15 years, couldn't we go ahead and do something now that would connect from one side to the other?
Yeah, you know, throughout the trail master plan, there are some connections that are looked at in that way. We're taking advantage of some type of existing structure just for pedestrian or cyclists, so we could certainly.
See, right there, there it is, right there.
That's Timber Creek.
Oh, is that Timber Creek?
It's a Timber Creek Relief.
Yeah.
Well, that's not the one I'm talking about. That's down there by the fire station, I think. I'm talking about,
That's right by the sushi place.
oh, it is?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sushi place is, we're standing in the sushi place from this angle.
The answer, Mayor, is I think we can look at options.
Yeah,
I think
that's
there are
true.
some opportunities. I mean, some of them are outlined in the
Yeah, I
trail
mean, if
master.
it's just pedestrian, I mean, obviously you don't have quite the requirements you would as if it were a. for
That's all I'm talking
vehicles.
about, is get up, I just heard her say, we want to work on, from west to east, over to connect to the mall, pedestrian.
But is that too far away?
You could also ride bicycles,
There are
I
a
mean,
lot of opportunities, actually. Yeah.
Yeah,
that's what
saying, trail
I guess
master
I'd like
plan
to look
has-
at. It may not be that one, but there's some
Right,
places
some other
across
ones.
there.
And actually, the next
You
slide,
could walk or ride bicycles,
Right.
rollerblade, whatever.
which especially that area where you just pointed out, Mayor, we've actually identified it because we have so much open space there, you know, and then basically taking advantage of, talking about that, taking advantage of these view corridors and open spaces and creating that connection.
Right.
So that is part of what we will be looking at, yeah.
I think something like that would use what's there would be easy to do. We just have to go in there and do a cleanup and.
Absolutely. Because trail master plan, and that, I don't remember
There are
that.
2 locations we've
That,
identified. I'm
you
trying
think that's
to.
one of them?
there,
that
one
they're talking
further
about?
south.
I knew there was
And the one further south
more.
might even be better, I don't know, but
We have identified.
you might use both, you know. Because I would think it'd be very minor cost to clean that up.
It should be.
And maybe pour a little walkway or something across 4 foot, or
And then-
8
Example is the levee improvement district stuff, where they have the trails underneath the bridge. They're not connected all yet, but we can do that too.
Right.
And then put gondolas in there and
Yeah,
stuff.
and that was a,
17 million.
yeah, and that was a recommendation.
Yeah, I wanted a gondola from, I'm not gonna, I wanted an air tram from the lake. to the
Yeah.
Yeah, to the.
Monorail.
Let's find some good ones.
Monorail.
That would be more fun.
We'll go back and look at that, Mayor.
Okay.
Absolutely. So, because we want to create, based on that open space areas, when we were looking at I-35, we realized how much opportunity is there for, really, you don't see it as you drive through the highway, because right now they're all overgrown and they, you know, there's just basically nothing there. But creating some sustainable areas where we not only help with drainage and water retention and, you know, and cleaning the water, and also, but creating that's really the look that we want along the highway. So that's part of the public funding. These are some of the things that we can do with our dollars that would really impact private development.
Right.
I totally agree.
So, and then, so other cities examples, again, most of you know what's happening around the Metroplex. One of the biggest one that's now going on is with the Valley View Galleria Mall area, because they pretty much have the same issues that we're talking about.
What are they doing? I've heard.
So what they've done is basically, what we are doing. So they've created a plan for this whole area, the one in red. They have a developer on board for a part of it that has purchased some parts of Valley View Mall, not all of it, and that's what the holdup is. So one of the things we need to always remember, and at the retreats, you're going to visit some areas, that it's so important to have the right developer on board, so they could make these things happen. So basically, they have created a plan. If you go to the next slide, that puts the criteria in place of what they want done, which is the vision is create a higher density, which is, they are going to allow higher density, a lot higher density that's been allowed in the past.
And that's basically your vertical.
That's your vertical mixtures. Now they're going to, again, it's a fairly large area, so they're going to have both. So the city has created the plan, the city has put a TIF in place already, because to take advantage of, because when the properties are distressed, that's your lowest value. Generally, that's where you want your TIF to go anyway, so the increment increases as the values go up. So they've already done that, and then they are just going after developers, and they are going to start some city-initiated rezoning.
Did that whole area, did that go up to their border?
Border of-
Carrollton, Farm Branch right there?
Yes.
That northern end went all the way, I figured it did. Yeah, well, it goes all the way to their border.
Yes. So that's their vision, create, more of an entertainment district, shopping and entertainment district. And they've set some priorities. And as you can see, some priorities are very, very long term, but you have to have it, and you have to know where you're going to accomplish each priority. So with our overlay district, and especially on phase 2, we will be having specific priority, so we know our to-do list for year 1, year 2, year 3, for the next. And this could go on for 20 years, and probably it will. But you will see incremental improvements, and as projects happen, it's just going to be like a domino effect we will have on the rest of the corridor. So that's our recommendation, is to engage a consultant for the overlay district, especially for phase 1. So we would have that in place as the highway is finishing, and we're going to be under pressure for development and redevelopment. So that would take the place. What Eric was talking about is an interim ordinance right now to deal with issues that are coming up right now. Once the overlay ordinance goes into effect, it'll take over that interim ordinance that we are proposing right now. We anticipate that it's going to take about 6 to 8 months for phase 1, and then phase 2, of course, it's more flexible. So that, as Trent and us are working with developers, engaging the private sector, and what we need to see at those nodal areas, especially the vacant land. The vacant land is, of course, the ones that are most under pressure with the existing zone.
TJ, see what I tell you? 18, 24 months?
I know, right? It's always right there.
18, 24 months?
No, first
Can
one,
we
6
just,
to 8
can we
months.
just have 6 months off of it?
But the whole thing's not completed
I'd love to see 12 and 18.
Well, that one,
Just take the 12
I
months
just
off
want
the
12 to 18.
bottom.
Yeah,
If I can get 12 to
Take-
18
take
around
the-
here.
That bottom one is not 12 months, it's
Yeah.
12 months plus.
And
So that's what I'm saying, the whole project is 18 to 24 months. Because phase 2 doesn't start till phase 1 is finished.
We actually can, it all depends on what we want. It's just we didn't want to start working on plans because the phase 2 truly needs, especially for the vacant land, we need a development partner. So we don't want to put in a place something that's, a developer is not going to do. Actually, phase 2 will involve, you guys remember, Parrish Rutherford, who was involved on the Vision 2025, he is a developer. So he's going to be part of this project and tell us truly what the market realities are, and then kind of, as part, use him to, to engage some developers to come to us and say, yes, this is doable, we want to do this.
Right.
So that will be part of that. We can, if the council directs us, we can start that process simultaneously. It's just we want to make sure that we're in the right place as we are starting, and not just spending money that we're not going to leverage for the actual project.
Two different categories, which one are you talking about? What she's talking about.
Is it?
Oh, the next one, I think we have some slides on some other issues that council wants to see.
So did you need any direction on this, Donna, or?
Mayor, the plan at this point would be for the March agenda is our target to bring back the draft ordinance, as we described, the impact ordinance, and a contract with PB to move forward with the corridor overlay district.
So if it's PB, Are they gonna need a full 6 to 8 months? Is that 6 to 8 months predicated on them already knowing?
That number's coming from him.
That number is actually, yes, because just this little ordinance we created in staff, of course, staff doesn't have time to devote completely to that one project. It took us about, because you have to look at so many factors. It took us about 4 months to do it. So it does need that much time to make sure you're getting the right ordinance. Actually, if PB wasn't involved, so they had all the data, all the knowledge, you would be looking at that 12 to 18 months.
And remember, some of this is not, Trent is engaged. Trent is going to be managing the overall I-35 development process. So some of these projects can start immediately. I mean, you told him today that he can start talking to vacant landowners. That's going to begin, and that's our highest risk area. That's really what you want to start moving forward, and we're ready to proceed. We need this meeting today.
Okay.
I think it's important that we've already said earlier that we want to go ahead and move forward with that, and I think we've told staff, and council, if you feel differently, let me know, but I think we basically told staff that yes, we want to move forward with this, and if you get a participant that wants to be a part of this, and we've kind of given you the guidelines, bring it back to us and see if that's something we want, and move forward with it. We don't have to wait 18, 24
Absolutely.
months. If you find something, bring it to us and let us look at it, see if we want to go ahead and move forward.
Yeah, this is the longer term.
Right,
piece.
this is so that
the
everybody
backstop
sees.
behind that.
That's
Right.
exactly right.
Frankly, once we get the ordinance, once the ordinance is adopted, then almost all this stuff's begins moving concurrently. And some of it's gonna be iterative by nature. I mean, there's probably gonna be a desire to have a fundamental set of principles and guidelines and all these things that go forward. But you gotta remember, this stuff is not gonna develop and redevelop at the same time.
Right.
So a snapshot of what this should look like is gonna have limited usefulness.
Right.
It's really gonna be how we start taking this one step at a time and be able to implement it, but until we have the ordinance in place and the regulatory processes, it's just impossible. So that has to be, we gotta get that done quick.
Okay.
And we might be able to be back as quickly as the second meeting in February. We're going to move it as quickly as we can. You brought up a couple issues we need to step back and look at, work with legal, but it's top priority.
Okay. Anything else that you need from council? Council got anything else they wanted to go over on this issue or anything? Okay, we're done.
Thank you.
Okay, we're adjourned.